Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of viewers aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this content, hit that subscribe button. It really helps keep these long stories coming. Also, for even more police horror stories, check out my new channel. The link's in the description and pinned comment. I'd love it if you stop by and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. What time is it where you are and which city are you listening from tonight? Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into it. I slipped beneath the surface just before dawn. The cold hit me like a punch before my regulator relieved the sting. Above me, the world was a pale blur. Below, everything went silent. My visor fogged for an instant as I exhaled, then cleared, revealing the riverbed strewn with debris from last night's storm. Branches, beer cans, the carcass of a shopping cart. My light cut through the murk in a narrow cone, illuminating suspended silt that drifted like smoke. I knew the missing kayaker's wife had watched me slide under the bow of her husband's boat the night before. Her grief would be waiting on shore. It propelled me deeper, away from the pale glimmer above. My dive computer beeped. 30 feet. The current was gentle here, swirling around my legs like an insistent whisper. I gripped the rope tether to the surface team, my lifeline, my only link to the world above. Somewhere beyond my helmet, the radio crackled, but I could not make out the words. Each syllable was filtered by the water and by my own pounding heartbeat. I oriented myself by sonar pings on my HUD, each pulse announcing distance to objects, to obstacles, to certainty. When the next ping returned no meaningful echo, I knew I was clear of the bank and entirely exposed. Moving forward, I saw Torres's light flicker against an overturned dune of silt. He fanned his beam across something bright and unnatural, the white plastic of a kayak hull. He tapped his regulator twice, a slow, deliberate signal meaning, found it. I approached, chest tightening. The craft lay half-buried, ribs of metal exposed where the hull had cracked. My fingers brushed against the rim of a shattered hatch. I pried it open, expecting to find some clue, a phone, a life vest, but all I saw was darkness and a faint swirl of sediment that suggested decay. No sign of him. The cold crept in around my mask, shivering through my bones. I pressed my fist against the hatch to create a temporary seal, careful not to disturb the debris and obscure our view entirely. Eagle 1 to surface team. My voice was a muted rasp in my helmet. Kayak located. No sign of victim yet. Continuing search. I heard acknowledgement, but words drifted away the instant they formed. My only response was a squeeze of my gloved hand on the tether. I kicked upward, using the side of the hull as leverage, and hovered just above the wreck. The silt stormed beneath me, reducing visibility to inches. I tapped my gauge, half my air gone. Behind me I sensed movement. An animal. A branch snapping loose. The current swirled tighter around my legs. I fanned my light ahead, revealing only more silt. Panic fluttered in my chest. I took a breath, focusing on the hiss of my regulator. The water pressure pressed in, every muscle straining, my vision narrowed to the circular frame of my torch. A second paddle blade drifted down into view, its sharp edge catching a flicker of light. I signaled Torres. He hovered alongside, torch beam dancing across the shaft. This was his. He nudged the blade toward me, then pointed over his shoulder, downstream. I followed his gesture but found only roiling gray. Then a dull thump resonated through my chest, transmitted through my regulator. I felt the tug before I saw the rope. It coiled around the stern, threading through the fractured ribs of the kayak. A crude noose of mangled cord held fast. I tried to untangle it, but each attempt pulled the craft deeper into the mud. My wrist slapped against the hull as I fought the line, and suddenly the tension snapped free. The kayak groaned and sank further, dragging my hand toward the silt. I kicked back, yanking my arm free. My glove snagged on a jagged edge, sharp enough to rip my neoprene, but I cut it loose with a quick slice of my dive knife, expelling a thin ribbon of bubbles. My heart raced. The world narrowed to bobbing bits of plastic and the soft click of my compass spinning out of control. I cursed under my breath, voice lost in the water. "Eagle 1, tether secure." The voice above was firm, grounding. I seized the rope and gave a hard tug. It held. Relief surged, but the stench of rot prickled at my nostrils, metallic, fouled. I shone my beam downward and made out a shape, an empty, waterlogged life jacket resting atop a submerged television set. The image struck me like a blow, a domestic scene warped by river's pull. The sight anchored me. It felt sacrilegious. No place for household relics beneath the waves. I signaled that I'd secured the kayak and was heading back. My gauge showed a sliver of air remaining, and I knew I'd push it close. Upwards I went, kicking hard, chest tight, until I breached the surface with a gasp. The sky was pale gray. The river's roar muffled my ragged breathing. I kicked toward the boat, pulling myself aboard as the tether slid through my fingers. Torres was there, wide-eyed, nodding once. I glanced back at the water. It lay calm, indifferent, concealing what I could not save and what I might never find. A bead of fear settled in my gut, colder than the dawn. I shook it off and clipped in, ready for what the next mission would demand. I dropped back into darkness before sunrise, the water's surface rippling above me as I sank through the abandoned reservoir's inlet. The air had smelled of damp stone at the pump house, but now everything was muted. No birdsong, no splash of oars, only the soft rasp of my regulator and the creak of water pressure on my suit. My beam cut a narrow tunnel through the reservoir's pale green gloom, revealing submerged girders and the skeleton of a concrete walkway that once led to a maintenance shack. The morning light filtered only in slivers, streaking downward through cracks in the dam wall like ghostly fingers. I fingered the small steel box strapped to my thigh. A case evidence hoped would contain files tied to that torso found weeks ago. But first, I had to navigate to the spillway arch, nearly 100 feet beneath the silent surface. My HUD glowed faintly. 90 feet. At this depth, the murk pressed in, and every breath felt weighty. I kicked slowly, careful not to stir the silt that lay thick over the reservoir floor. With each fin stroke, fine particles fanned into my light beam, smothering visibility. My tether line snaked loosely in the current, connecting me to the rigid steel cable above, the only guarantee I wouldn't drift into oblivion. Over the radio, Handler's voice crackled, strained. "Eagle 1, confirm you're in position." I tapped my ear cup, letting the hollow bubble of water carry my response back up. Affirmative. Approaching spillway entrance. Ahead, the arch loomed, crumbling brickwork still coated in moss and algae from years of uncontrolled water. The spillway's mouth yawned open, black and infinite. I signaled for Torres to fan his light across the entrance and make sure we were clear of large debris. His halo of illumination found a twisted length of rebar caught in the stonework, its rust-pitted surface promising a brutal snare for any unaware diver. I navigated around it, heedful of my buoyancy, and guided my beam deeper into the darkness. Inside the spillway, the current narrowed and sped up, tugging at my shoulders. My chest tightened as the water pressed against my suit, and I fought to keep my regulator steady. Each inhale felt mechanical, each exhale a whisper lost in the vast void. I remembered briefing. Recover the box, then search perimeter. But memory was slippery here. My mind flickered with echoes, the handler's words, the weight of that sealed container, and the faint possibility of what we might uncover. The body had been too damaged to ID. Now we chased paperwork that might unravel the case. I reached the far wall and wedged my light against the stone, its beam quivering on a rectangular metal box festooned with barnacles and thread-like plants. I pried at the latch with my knife, surprising even myself at how loud the metallic scrape sounded in the hush. With a resolute yank, the top popped free, revealing water-soaked manila folders inside. Though darkened and kneaded by current, some corners remained legible. I slipped my hand in, extracted what felt like a folder labeled Case Number 94, and stuffed it into a watertight sleeve on my vest. As I worked, a sudden pulse vibrated through the wall. A low-frequency thrum I recognized as an echo from heavy machinery above. Perhaps the turbines still spinning unseen. The vibration made the silt rise in towering clouds that drifted between me and Torres, fracturing my lamp's beam into dizzying prisms. My ears popped reflexively against the pressure change, and I fought the urge to surface. Instead, I focused on Handler's voice. "Eagle 1, status?" My reply rasped. "Artifact secured. Commencing perimeter scan." But the pulse came again, stronger, thrumming through my mask. I realized the old dam's valves must be opening elsewhere, sending rushes of water through adjacent channels. Movement flickered beyond my field, a coil of rope drifting past, then another. A cascade of silt erupted downstream as something large shifted, a collapsed girder or a slab of masonry giving way. The tunnel moaned, a living thing. My chest tightened so fiercely I thought I might collapse inside my own suit. I kicked backward, but the current snared my fins, dragging me sideways into a narrow crevice in the stone. My beam swung wildly, catching a glimpse of what looked like tangled metal cables snaking into a deeper fissure. Fear shot through me. I'd read reports of dive teams lost to hidden sinkholes in these decay-ridden structures. I fought to free myself, slicing at the cables, but they were too thick, corroded into the walls. The spillway's pulse intensified, and the entire arch shuddered as if slapped by an invisible hand. Tiny shards of brick rained down, tapping against my helmet. My gauge blinked low visibility, flashing red, 50 feet remaining. Time had become a phantom. The world narrowed to my own panicked breaths and the relentless pulse in my ears. I signaled Torres to help, but his light wavered uncertainly behind the silt cloud, and I felt utterly alone. Then, abruptly, the vibration stopped. Silence slammed into me like a door. The water stilled except for my own regulator hiss and the far-off drip of leaking pipes. Through the veil of silt, I glimpsed Torres's shape slip past the spillway's mouth into the open reservoir. He thumbed a rapid ascend signal. I glanced at the black hole behind me. The fissure seemed to gape like a maw. My heart pounded. I clutched the box strapped to my thigh and gave one last tug on the tether. The rope slackened. No tension. Panic surged. My lifeline was gone. I yanked at it, but only a few inches slid through my glove before it snagged. I twisted, trying to see where it had caught, but the lagoon of dust turned my beam to nothing. "Eagle 1!" I pounded on my chest plate, repeating the emergency call. 3 rapid hits. No response. My radio silent. My gauge ticked lower, 45 feet. I kicked toward the spillway mouth, but the arch seemed to recede. My fins struck brick. Small fragments crumbled under the thrust. The reservoir's gloom swallowed me, and I realized I had no compass reference, no tether guide, only the tenuous corridor of my torch beam. I surged forward, silt roiling, vision reduced to a few inches. Then, my light flickered. The battery warning icon glowed orange. My pulse hammered in my ears. Regulator clicks felt deafening. I reached up, tapped the side of the light to stabilize it, but it dimmed further, beam fragmenting into fractured shards. I froze, mouth filling with cold water as my second stage fluttered. My gauge began its rapid descent. 30 feet. 30 feet left to find an exit. Everything was alive with threat. The dripping pipes overhead could collapse. The silt could trap me. My air could give out. Fingers slick on metal, I jammed the battery hatch open, my blade clicking against the rim. The spare cell rolled out. A small salvation, but out of reach. I cursed into my mask, lunging for it, but in that moment the current hit full force. It roared past, sweeping me sideways. I lost balance, spinning into the tunnel's interior, the battery thunking past me into the void. My lamp died in a split second. I groped in the blackness, the sudden void of my light pressing every sense into hyperdrive. My lungs burned with sterile cold as I yanked my secondary torch from its mount, my hands slick with water and adrenaline. The backup should have clicked on instantly, but its last sputtering beam cast only a faint pulsing glow before dying altogether. My heart seized at the realization. I was blind, tethered only by memory and the faint echo of my own breathing. I steadied myself against the crumbling brick wall, fingers trailing over rough mortar to find orientation. Each toe kick sent up clouds of silt that drifted into my mask, blurring the edges of perception. I fought the rising tide of panic, counting my breaths. Inhale, 1, exhale, 2, inhale, 3, exhale, 4. The world contracted to the rhythm of my life support. Hiss, click, hiss, click. My gauge flickered in the dim residual glow of my HUD. 10 minutes of air remaining, my last margin. I needed to find the spillway arch, the sole exit, and quickly. I reached for the tether. The rope's rough braid felt warm against my glove, but it offered no guidance, only slack. My lifeline had vanished back into the gloom where the fissure yawned like a wound in the dam's underbelly. Eagle 1, respond. I pounded my chest plate 3 times, but no radio crackled in reply. The silence was deeper than water, a living thing that pressed on my ears. I forced a calm breath and listened for directional clues. A faint current drawing me down, the distant drip of leaking valves, the soft thrum of turbines echoing from the reservoir above. My mind mapped the tunnel's geometry from memory, straight for 20 feet, then a slight left where the arch's keystone had fallen years ago. I held on to that mental blueprint as I edged forward, one careful kick at a time. The silt parted reluctantly beneath me, revealing the outline of a fallen girder. Its rusted surface scraped against my suit as I inched past, sending a shower of brick dust into the water. My lungs quivered with the effort. If I misjudged and struck the girder, I could tear my suit or tangle myself beyond escape. I hovered, hand grazing the concrete wall, until I found the crooked seam where the wall met the ceiling. The pressure there felt different, thicker, as if the crack had widened. I pressed my cheek against the cool brick, eyes closed, letting the textured surface anchor me. Then, faintly, I heard it. A distant bubble trail, Torres's signal. He must have deployed a delayed release marker buoy before surfacing, hoping its rising bubbles would guide me. Relief was a hot punch in my chest as I kicked toward the hiss of released gas. The bubbles danced overhead in slow arcs, like ghostly orbs in the gloom. Following them, I angled upward, each stroke surging me closer to safety. A sudden jolt rocked my body. Something struck me from above. jolting me off course and sending me spiraling into the silt. My mask filled with cloud, and I coughed bubbles into the murk. My flailing hand knocked against a hard edge. I grabbed a rebar rod protruding from a collapsed support beam, clutching it like a lifeline. The sudden impact had dislodged the marker buoy's rope, and the bubbles flickered away, swallowed by darkness. Panic flared again. I was lost. I froze, gloved hand clenched around rusted steel, listening for any clue. A faint current tugged me northward, a different direction than I expected. I risked a glance at my compass. Even in this gloom, the compass needle quivered, pointing toward what should have been the arch. I latched onto that bearing and pushed off the rebar, kicking with all my strength against the press of water. My suit strained, the creak of neoprene louder than the distant drone of machinery. After what felt like an eternity, I was acutely aware of every bubble I exhaled. I burst through a patch of clearer water. Moonlight filtered in, a pale spotlight revealing the jagged silhouette of the spillway's mouth. I surged toward it, limbs burning, mind narrowing to one desperate goal: survival. Just as I reached the opening, a violent surge of water flooded the arch, sending a jet of debris and silt crashing into me. My grip on the rope tether, my last hope, slipped free. I was sucked backward, tumbling into the tunnel's throat as the arch's teeth of concrete slammed shut with a low, echoing roar. My vision dimmed to swirling gray. My air gauge hovered at red. 2 minutes. I clawed at the falling bricks, clawed at the tether, but the current whipped me into the passage, spinning me head over fins. I thrashed in the black current, limbs and gear swirling through the narrow tunnel as the arch's jagged teeth ground shut around me. My secondary torch was dead, my primary lost, my tether vanished. The only thing alive was the frantic beating of my heart and the hiss of my regulator reminding me that every breath was borrowed. I fought to control my breathing, to let cold focus replace raw fear, but water pressure pressed on my skull like a vice. I forced my body into motion, kicking toward where I remembered the arch should tower above, a colossal mouth framed by broken concrete. My fingers skimmed the rough masonry, fingertips bruising on sharp edges as I crawled upward through the swirling silt. At 75 feet depth, my gauge flickered. The red LED warning pulsed against my HUD. Time was bleeding away. I knew I had exactly 2 minutes of bottom time before decompression alarms would shriek in my ear, but there was no protocol for being lost in a collapsed spillway. Instinct told me to find open water. Training reminded me to ascend slowly. Neither applied when you were trapped under a concrete tomb, and every heartbeat threatened to starve your brain of oxygen. My mouthpiece squeaked with effort as I turned my head, trying to spot any sign of daylight. Instead, I caught a glimpse of something metallic, a thin sliver of reflective tape near where the arch met the floor. A strobe marker. Torres must have clipped one to a rebar limb during his exit to guide me if I lost orientation. Relief and dread knotted together. Relief that he'd thought ahead. Dread because if the marker still existed, it meant it hadn't moved at all. It hadn't drifted to the spillway mouth and certainly not escaped. I craned forward, tracking the faint flashes of white tape as they blinked in stride with my pulse. The current tugged me sideways and I fought to stay on the line. The tunnel's length felt infinite. Each sparking flash of the marker was a promise that safety lay ahead, but every promise felt too thin to trust. My lungs burned, but I clipped my fins into a slow, steady rhythm. Kick, kick, drift, kick, kick, drift, aligning with the marker's beat. Behind me, water cascaded down a fissure, the faint roar of the reservoir's outflow. My HUD's decompression timer ticked down. 1 minute, 50 seconds. I kicked harder, arms outstretched, fingers brushing the falling silt. As I passed a fallen girder, I felt something shift ahead, a rotted plank clattering loose, sending brick chips dancing like brown snow. The tunnel groaned again, louder this time, as if the structure resented my passage. I paused for a heartbeat, inhaling as calmly as I dared, listening for the crash that would seal my fate. When none came, I resumed, head pounding, vision a haze of murk and moats. A sudden rush of water slammed into me from above, a turbulent pulse that threatened to knock me backward. I planted my fins and gripped the jagged wall, fighting the eddying swirl that yanked me off balance. The line of marker tape quivered ahead, drifting then snapping taut as the surge passed. I seized it, sliding 2 gloved hands around its braid, and felt the reassuring tension of nylon under my fingers. Whatever had collapsed above had shifted the marker, but not broken the line. I had a lead. With renewed determination, I hauled myself along the guide, muscle memory taking over as my breathing labored. Each stroke brought me closer. I could almost taste air. My dive computer beeped, 50 seconds of bottom time remaining. My pulse thudded faster, but I forced it to slow. Panic was the enemy now. Then, ahead, a pale blur, a rectangle of shadow against flowing water, the spillway mouth. My heart lurched. I threw a final kick, bursting toward the opening, the torrent of fresher water tugging me forward. Light raked through the tunnel's jagged entrance, a pale, flickering shaft that felt like a promise. I reset my buoyancy and angled up, guiding myself through the haze. My chest seized as pressure eased. The world sounded suddenly loud, my own rapid breathing, the roar of rushing water, the distant radio crackle from the boat above. I kicked out into open water, fins breaking free of the arch's lip. I pitched forward, bursting through the surface with a gasp that snatched the air from my lungs. My mask and suit rammed with light and sound. The dawn sky was an indifferent blue, the reservoir's surface smooth again. I clawed at the boat's gunwale, my gloves slipping on damp metal as I hauled myself aboard. Torres leaned over, eyes wide, wordless. My chest heaved. Some part of me felt numb as I secured my helmet and regulator, but another part clung to the collision of terror and triumph that still thundered through my veins. I held up the braid of marker tape, half ripped, smeared with blood and mud, as if it were a trophy. Handler's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Eagle 1, are you okay?" I coughed, water trickling from my mask. "Affirmative," I rasped, "but I'm done here." They helped me into a dry flight suit, and when I stood on deck, gaze fixed on the silent arch, I let my mask tilt as the wind dried the water from my face. My mind replayed the darkness, the groaning concrete, the taste of failure that came with every lost second. I felt both emptiness and an undeniable pull, a need to return, to finish what I'd started. But I wouldn't, not today. I watched the spillway's shadows stretch under the rising sun, and I wondered what lay beyond the tunnel. What secrets of the drowned world would remain hidden? My lungs burned at the memory of that final surge, and I realized that beneath the surface, terror wasn't just in what you saw, it was in the things you couldn't. I waded into the shallows of the abandoned pier basin at midnight, the moonless sky above offering no guide, only a velvet smother of clouds. I clipped the dive light to my chest strap and checked my gear. Tanks full, gauges green, compass humming softly. The handler's voice held a clipped urgency over the radio. "Eagle 1, your objective is evidence recovery at .7 Echo. A submerged utility vault may contain critical documents. Expect heavy silt." I acknowledged the call, my visor misting as I slid beneath the inky water. The first few feet were deceptively calm, My fins disturbed only gentle eddies around pilings encrusted with barnacles. Then, at 20 feet, the world shifted. A collapsed section of the pier overhead filtered out what little surface sound remained, and the water grew cold. The ambient light from my beam reduced to a faint iris. I tapped my compass. Due south, toward the submerged vault. Each kick was deliberate, cautious, lest I stir the bottom into clouds of fine particles. I passed the first arch of supporting beams, their metal frames corroded into jutting teeth. My light beam jittered across a tangled mass of wiring and pipe, and static crackled through my earpiece as I passed beyond range of the surface buoy. The vault entrance lay just a few feet below, a rectangular hatch set flush into the concrete floor. I hovered above it, water drifting in slow spirals, like ash falling from an invisible fire. I secured my position by gripping a rusty support beam and pried at the hatch's latch. The metal groaned, and the sound echoed like a tortured whisper. When the top popped free, a plume of silt erupted, turning visibility to inches. I signaled Torres, but only my handprint remained, fading into the mucky swirl. Steeling myself, I reached inside the hatch and felt around the lip for the secured briefcase, our target evidence. My gloved fingers closed on cold metal. I yanked it free, and the case slapped against my chest with a hollow thunk. Relief surged, but then I heard it, the faint but unmistakable snap of shifting debris. Something heavy had fallen somewhere within the vault, and the structure groaned under unseen stress. I toggled my light to its high beam, piercing a narrow cone ahead. The vault's interior was larger than expected, with rows of shelving cannibalized by time. Folders and loose papers drifted in the water like phantoms. I secured the briefcase, but a sense of wrongness gripped me. These aisles of relics were never meant to be underwater. A distant rumble rolled through the basin. I looked up to see a cluster of broken concrete blocks trembling above me. The roof of the vault had begun to collapse. I signaled urgency and turned to exit, but my beam caught a movement at the edge of the vault, a pale shape moving with deliberate slowness. My heart lurched. It looked like a suit. A diving suit from decades ago, slack and sodden, drifting upright as if guarded by currents. Rusted clamps on its helmet shimmered, and trailing from its wrist was a length of electrical cable snaking back into the darkness. I froze, the regulator's hiss thunderous in my ears. The old suit swayed gently, its arms reaching out, either in a futile plea or a silent warning. I fought to rationalize it. An artifact, perhaps left by scrap divers long ago. But the thought churned with dread. Why would such a large suit remain tethered here, undiscovered? And why did the cable vanish into the black fissure beneath the shelving? Before I could react, the concrete above me gave a final, bone-jarring crack. A shower of debris rained down, and I felt the pulse of collapsing stone. My body jolted as a jagged slab pinned my left shoulder to the floor. Pain flared. My airway flickered with panic. I was trapped, the vault hatch spinning out of sight as silt clouds boiled up to choke my vision. I kicked free with one leg, but the slab held fast. My HUD beeped low air, 60 seconds of safe bottom time before decompression alarms. I keyed the emergency signal. 3 rapid thumps on my chest plate. No response. My tether, it seemed, had been severed by the falling concrete. Above me, the broken diving suit floated, its blank visage looming closer as if drawn by my distress. My shoulder burned with each breath forced through the regulator. I glanced at the briefcase strapped to my thigh. It was my only leverage for escape. Summoning strength, I jabbed the butt end of my dive knife beneath the slab's edge and twisted. The metal slipped, and a jagged spray of rubble scoured my mask. I gasped against the regulator, tunnel vision edging in. Then the suit's helmet clanged against the vault floor, and a soft hiss emerged. Not from my gear, but from the old suit itself, as if its air supply had somehow reactivated. The hiss became a whispering cascade. "Help me." My blood ran cold. I yanked my knife free and threw my weight against the slab. It shifted, the edge loosened. I planted my feet and heaved. The concrete slab groaned as it slid aside, freeing my shoulder, but the maneuver kicked up a cyclone of sediment that enveloped me completely. All sound vanished except that impossible hiss and my own desperate breathing. I clawed toward the vault hatch, my gloved hands brushing against the steel edge, and felt the world tilt. My regulator clicked once, clean and sharp, then fell silent. I lay pinned beneath the vault's shattered roof, the stale hiss of my regulator cut off as though the water itself had swallowed my life support. Darkness pressed in so thick my hands could not find the edge of the hatch. My lungs screamed for air, each second stretching into agony. I clutched the sealed briefcase to my chest, its metal surface slick and cold, an anchor to reality. Somewhere beyond the silt-choked gloom, the abandoned diving suit drifted like a rag doll, its helmet's whispering hiss taunting me with the promise of air it would never share. Instinct drove me to fight. I pried my blades free from their socket, then stabbed upward at the jagged slab pinning my shoulder. Concrete and rusted rebar groaned as I carved a small gap. Pain flared, hot and ragged, but I did not pause. With one final heave, I twisted the blade, and the slab shifted enough for me to slide my arm free. A spray of sediment burst into my mask. I coughed bubbles, eyes stinging with grit. Gasping through the regulator's uneven hiss, I clawed toward the hatch opening. My fingers scraped the metal flange and caught the edge. With a guttural pull, I yanked myself upward, mud and brick cascading down. My head broke through the silt layer, and light exploded around me. Fuzzy, gray, indescribably bright. I spat water from my mouth and coughed, my heart pounding like war drums. My masked mate, Torres, hovered above, eyes wide beneath his visor. His hand reached in to steady me as I heaved the briefcase free. "Eagle 1, get to the surface, now!" he barked, voice urgent. I kicked sideways, both of us careful not to stir another collapse. The hatch slammed shut behind me with a heavy thunk, sealing the vault like a tomb. I surged upward, following Torres's lead line, silt swirling in my beam, each stroke forcing the murk away. The tunnel walls receded, and I felt the water lighten around me. The roar of outflow valves hammered in my ears. I propelled myself through the archway at a frantic angle, lungs aching, vision graying with fatigue. The mouth of the spillway yawned above, and I thrust my arms toward it. Freedom so close I could taste salt on my lips. But just as I felt the suction of open water, a sudden tremor rattled the concrete above. Chunks of masonry broke free, plummeting in a cascade of ruin. I scattered to the side, but the surge pinned me against the arch's lip. My gloves scraped raw on fractured stone. Above, the spillway mouth tightened. Another slab shifting, narrowing the exit. My gauge blinked, 30 seconds of air. Panic pricked at my spine. I yanked a length of rope from my belt, a makeshift lifeline, and looped it around a protruding girder. With all my remaining strength, I heaved. The arch moaned, and a jagged piece of concrete cracked free, widening the gap by inches. Water gushed past me in a choking torrent, but the passage had opened just enough. I kicked through, lungs seizing at the sudden rush of decompression. I burst into open water, the reservoir's cold embrace replaced by the splinter of dawn. I surged toward the surface, heedless of decompression protocol. my chest filled with frigid air as I broke through, gasping. Foam crowned the water's mirror, and the sky wheeled overhead in muted pink and gray. Torres hauled me into the boat with iron resolve, securing the briefcase as I slumped against the gunwale. My mask and gloves fell away, and I pressed my face against my knees, the world spinning. The handler's voice was distant but steady. Eagle 1, return to base. Report incoming. I nodded, swallowing against the lump in my throat. My jacket lay nearby, wet and heavy. I braced my shoulder against the hull, heart still hammering. Beyond the reservoir, the dam's concrete flank rose like a silent sentinel, guarding its drowned secrets. I hadn't seen the ghostly suit again. It must have drifted deeper into the vault, forever tethered to its wreckage, its whispering promise unanswered. I closed my eyes against tears I could not shed, and felt the weight of survival settle over me. I woke in the infirmary hours later, drenched in sweat, heart still racing as if I'd never truly left the water. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed, flickered, and I blinked against them, the antiseptic scent clinging to the sterile air. A medic hovered with a clipboard, murmuring about post-decompression syncope and monitoring vitals. I nodded numbly, chest heaving with every breath, the weight of the briefcase resting in my lap like a heart-shaped stone. They offered coffee, but I shook my head. The world felt off-kilter, too bright, too sharp. My ears still rang with the echo of rushing water and the metallic hiss that was no longer my regulator. Somewhere in the recesses of my mind, I could hear that old diving suit whispering through my skull. Hours earlier, I had surfaced from that vault beneath the pier basin, leaving behind the collapsed concrete, the pinned roof slab, and the phantom-looking suit with its airless hiss. I had thought my ordeal was ending then, thought it had all been confined to murky depths. But sunlight cut through the infirmary window like a blade, and the floodlights in my helmet still glowed behind my eyes. They asked for a statement, official debrief, case numbers, timelines. I complied, recounting every detail with mechanical precision, listing coordinates, depths, equipment IDs, times down and times up. But my mind wandered, tracing the path of that suit's cable as it slid into the vault's dark fissure, the way its helmet's visor had caught my torch beam before the collapse. After the paperwork, I walked barefoot out onto the docks, letting the salt air wash over me. The pier basin reflected the afternoon sun, ripples breaking across its surface as small waves lapped against moored boats. Everything looked placid, benign. Yet I knew beneath the mirror there were voids filled with silt, submerged corridors, and iron tombs that groaned in the current. I asked a deckhand to show me the location of Point 7 Echo. He pointed to a slate marker on a piling, faded and warped. The water there was shallow, reeking of brine and exhaust, but I didn't stare too long. I felt the line between life and death stretch thin where the vault hatch lay, forgotten under decades of coral growth and barnacle crust. That night, I lay in my bunk and dreamed of the archive of evidence case files, floating loose in the vault like drowned pages, labels bobbing in currents. I dreamed the briefcase I had rescued cracked open of its own accord, papers swirling free, drifting down into the vault's yawning depths. I dreamed the suit glided through the water, beckoning to me with a silent, broken plea. Help me. When I woke, the coffee pot was whistling on the nightstand. I poured a cup, hands trembling, and sipped the bitter liquid. I ran my tongue over the metallic tang of fear still coating my palate. The uniform I'd slept in was folded neatly at the foot of the bed, pressed and ready. I stared at it, imagining the familiar weight of my gear harnessing my body again. I had missions lined up. Troubled waters to search, evidence to recover, missing persons to find. But something inside me recoiled. The pools I had entered were not natural. They were ruins, constructed by human hands, invaded by water. Each mission had peeled back layers of rust and silt, revealing more than bones or paperwork. It exposed secrets meant to stay buried. Beneath the surface, the river remembered every wrong, every collapse, every betrayal. The water carried them, silent and corrosive, like a relentless memory that never fades. I walked to the edge of the dock in the pre-dawn hush and looked down at the basin's inky stillness. Moonlight glinted on small ripples. I imagined the diving suit drifting below, tethered to nothing, breathing its last hiss of air into the void, waiting for someone to answer. My communicator cracked to life with a new assignment. Eagle 1, are you available for a midnight dive at Lake Calhoun? The calm voice of my handler, steady, expectant, filtered through the static. I closed my eyes, listening to the faint echo of that impossible hiss, and drank the last of my coffee. My skin crawled at the thought of descending again into dark water, into structures that groaned like living things. My first breath came as a hiss through the regulator, a familiar mechanical rasp that felt more like a warning than reassurance. Above me, the sky was still stitched in stars. Below, everything dissolved into shifting gray. I checked my depth gauge by touch, 12 feet, and noted the time on my wrist computer, 4:03. We had a narrow window before the morning light penetrated the silt, and with it, any chance to find the evidence we were sent for. My fins kicked once, twice, stirring mud that curled in lazy clouds, obscuring the outlines of the intake tower. I signaled to Ramirez, my junior diver, whose bubbles hovered beside me like startled birds. He gave the thumbs up, and we pressed on toward the base of the concrete column. The riverbed here was littered with debris, branches, empty bottles, a child's plastic bucket. I scanned with my light, its beam narrow and wavering, until it fell on the glint of metal, the submerged door handle of an SUV long since claimed by the current. I drifted closer, every motion deliberate to minimize silt. My heart thumped in my ears, distinct against the regulator's steady hiss. The buckle of a seatbelt snagged on the wheel well, moving ever so slightly as I nudged it free. Now I could see the interior. Shards of broken glass, a wallet turned out on its side, damp cash curling around the gear shift. The vehicle must have plummeted off the adjacent road years ago, but tonight it served as a grim repository for our missing teenager, whose frantic messages pinged ceaselessly until his battery died at 10:23 the previous night. I tapped my tank to alert Ramirez, then signaled search left. He obediently veered into the gloom, his light wavering as he finned through the muck. I followed the contours of the shore, finger-marked in my mind by subtle changes in the current. At 20 feet, the pressure creaked in my ears, a reminder that every meter deeper forced my body to inch closer to its limits. A soft scrape echoed off the tower's wall, metal on concrete. My blood chilled. I swiveled toward the sound, the compass on my wrist dancing wildly. Silence swallowed the scrape and then, faintly, a second scratch, like claws on a coffin lid. I flicked my light into the void, nothing but swirling sediment. My chest tightened. Ramirez, I signaled, but the line attaching us snagged on something below. I wished for a knife, the kind clipped to my hip, but protocol forbade unsheathing it until evidence was bagged. I kicked back to clear the snag, but whatever caught the tether tugged in response, sending a jolt up my arm that rattled my senses. My glove brushed against something soft and yielding, too soft for metal. I shut down my panic with a forceful breath. the regulator clicking to life, and swept my light across the floor. A white sneaker lay half buried in the silt, its laces drifting like kelp. No tag, no name, just a lone shoe that looked impossibly fresh in this stale, submerged world. I exhaled, each bubble a plucked string of fear. Protocol demanded I bag the sneaker as potential evidence, but instinct screamed that what we'd stumbled on wasn't a clue, it was a warning. I signaled to Ramirez to hold position. He met my gaze through his mask, wide-eyed in the dim beam. Communications. I tapped my wrist, but the signal cut to static. We were too deep, too far into the reservoir's belly. I flicked my light upward, tracing the beam back to the surface in search of that faint silver line where water met air. But the silt clouds conspired against me, turning the column of light into a phantom. My throat went dry. I remembered the briefing. Visibility may be 0. Rely on your sonar and tether. I scraped at my mask to clear a patch for sight, and in that moment, caught movement above. A silhouette drifting just beyond the intake grate. I signaled contact and pointed toward the shape, but when Ramirez shone his light, it vanished. No grate, no silhouette, only the vacant tower wall and swirling gray. My heart hammered so loud it threatened to drown out my regulator's hiss. I frowned and tapped my console. Air at 50%. Plenty to finish the search, but not enough if we were chasing ghosts. Taking a deep, calculated breath, I drifted toward where the grate should have been, ignoring the tug in my chest that screamed we were trespassing in something darker than an accident scene. My hand brushed the barreled edge of the concrete, slick with algae, when the clang came again, so loud it vibrated through my bones. Something hit the wall, twice, then silence. I spun, light carving a circle in the gloom. No branches, no fish, nothing that should make a metallic clang down here. My tether tightened, pulling me backward. I kicked desperately for the surface, following the silver sliver of light I hoped would be my exit. But as I ascended, the regulator clicked once, then twice, before shutting off in a single, terrifying burst of silence. I tugged frantically at my backup regulator, the octo clipped to my chest, but my gloved fingers fumbled in the silt-choked gloom. My primary regulator's click had been a death knell, and now every inhale felt like a gamble. I forced myself to calm, to remember the drills drilled into me during countless dark water training dives. Locate backup first, switch second. But the reservoir's floor had shifted in the initial disturbance, and my octo's yellow hose lay pinned beneath a tangle of metal debris. Panic clawed up my spine as my lungs screamed for air. I pinched the top of my mask to clear the rising film of sediment and freed up a patch of vision. The intake tower's column stretched overhead, a silent monolith reminding me how deep I'd plunged. My light beam sliced upward, a wavering line pointing towards salvation that seemed a world away. I signaled low air, switching to Ramirez, whose frantic nod only heightened my dread. My next breath came through my reserve regulator, the familiar hiss like a ragged sigh. I clenched the mouthpiece, focusing on its steady rhythm. Air at 30%, far too low, but my second stage held. I tapped my gauges and noted the time. 7 minutes since descent, and no evidence bagged, no teenager, no other clue. We had exceeded plan time by a solid 2 minutes, and every second below meant less margin for error. I signaled to Ramirez to follow my light left, toward the intake grate where we'd seen that drifting sneaker. He tightened his grip on his own octo, bubbles streaming upward like hesitant farewells, and finned beside me. As we approached the base of the column again, the pre-dawn light trickled in, turning the gray slurry to a dim, greenish-brown haze. Visibility worsened, I could no longer make out the grate's edge. Instead, I felt the wall with my hand, slick and cold, the concrete turning to bare rebar where corrosion had stripped it. A low rumble vibrated through the water. My first thought was a passing barge overhead. The reservoir's pump station often shunted vessels too close. But this felt different. A rolling pulse that shook my bones, like the heartbeat of something massive stirring in the depths. I tapped to Ramirez twice. "Stay close." He swam in tighter, and I flicked my light toward the silt floor. That's when I saw the teenager's backpack, tethered around a length of pipe. Straps frayed, but the pack looked recently torn, its contents spilled. A water bottle, a battered smartphone with a cracked screen, and a leather-bound notebook, its cover caked in mud. I carefully uprooted the sack, planting my knee on the rib of a submerged beam for leverage. As I lifted, the mud unleashed in plumes that swallowed the world. Through the murk, 2 glowing eyes appeared, small, reflective, and dead still. My heart lurched. I shone my light in the direction of the eyes, but the beam couldn't penetrate the cloud of sediment. The eyes faded into gray, replaced by an outline, a body, floating just above the reservoir floor, head tilted back, hair swirling like kelp. For a moment, I thought it was the missing swimmer, but the silhouette dissolved as Ramirez's light broke through the silt. The body wasn't human. It was the hulking carcass of a deer, bloated and grotesque, antlers tangled in rebar, belly split open by scavengers. The eyes I'd seen belonged to the deer's head, glassy, vacant, yet somehow alive in the shifting haze. I attempted to bag the backpack and notebook into an evidence pouch, but the action dislodged the carcass, and it drifted free in a lazy, horrifying pirouette, antlers snapping at nothing. The thud of a hoof against concrete echoed like a gunshot. Ramirez shouted into his mic, "I'm seeing movement." My blood ran cold. Nothing should move down here except human limbs and silt. I swiveled my light, sweeping the beam across the gray void, trying to locate the source of the thud. Instead, my beam caught on something smaller, a child's doll face, half buried in mud, its glass eyes staring wide. I felt bile rise as I recalled the boy's mother's tear-stained face at the press conference. She'd described his final text, "Mom, I'm fine." Now his toy lay at my feet, under 40 feet of water, silent as the forgotten. The current surged without warning, sending debris swirling in a vortex that pulled at my legs. I fought to maintain position, finning upward to counter the rip. My tether tugged dangerously tight. Was it snagged again, or caught on the carcass? I didn't dare check. A sudden click from the intake tower signaled the sluice gate opening upstream. The reservoir's outflow had begun, and cold water roared past, reducing visibility to 0. I signaled "Abort mission" and punched my console. "Up, up," I mouthed to Ramirez, but the current shoved us downward. We clawed at the wall, inching along the column toward what we hoped was an exit point. The regulator's hiss sounded frantic now, as if urging us to hurry. I checked air, Ramirez at 20%, me at 25%. We hadn't enough to fight the surge for long. I reached a ridge in the concrete, the lip of the tower's intake chamber. Fingers numb, I grasped the ledge and yanked with everything I had. Sediment cascaded in a gray waterfall, momentarily clearing the beam's path. In that fleeting clarity, I saw the grate. Bent inward, its bars twisted like claws. The teenager's final message might have been sent from this very spot before he slipped under. I extended my arm, ready to wedge my knife in the gap and force it aside. That's when something slammed into my torso, pinning me to the ledge. It hit me hard, solid like wood, and I smelled decay. The impact knocked the air from my lungs, making my chest clamp down on the regulator. I fought to keep breathing, legs kicking wildly. Ramirez's hand appeared in my light. He was trying to haul me free, but the thing kept pushing, inch by inch. I flicked the light up in desperation. Through the waver of silt, I made out the twisted shape of the deer's ribcage. Its jaw gaped in a silent scream. But the movement wasn't just the carcass drifting. It was the current whipping its remains as though something unseen had taken hold. My knife pressed against the grate as I lunged, slicing the metal tether that bound my octo. Air surged back into my chest. The octo flared with a hiss, flooding me with relief. Ramirez yanked me forward, clearing the ribcage's death grip. I kicked toward the grate's broken opening, ignoring the dagger-thrust pain in my shoulder where the impact had struck. We surged upward, following the pinprick of surface light that had grown to a sliver. My ears popped with pressure changes. My vision swam with every bubble expelled from my mask. Then came the regulator's second failure click. So soft and deliberate it sounded like a final ultimatum. Air dropped below 10%. Ramirez tapped my arm. Last breaths. I nodded, spitting bubbles. We kicked through the silt column as it collapsed into the intake shaft behind us, the water above roiling as if protesting our ascent. A hand broke the surface. Mine. I was pulled onto the boat deck, gasping, chest heaving, surrounded by the shocked faces of our dive team. They hauled Ramirez up beside me. The teenager's backpack was on my chest, notebook sealed, its mud-damp pages pressed to my heart. The deer carcass lay forgotten in the half-lit bow, tangled in the grate we'd ripped free. I sat trembling, watching the dawn spill gold over the reservoir's surface. We had the backpack, but not the boy. And out there in the gray murk, something had tasted my fear and lived to haunt me again. I hit the water again before the sun fully broke the horizon, my lungs still echoing with the taste of turbine-churned silt. The boat's hull rattled overhead as Ramirez and I submerged once more, hunched against the current that had nearly torn us from the intake tower. My wrist computer read 5:47, nearly 2 hours into what was supposed to be a 1-hour search. Every gauge screamed caution, but we had to return to the flooded service tunnel upstream, where witnesses said they'd seen the teenager's final footprints vanish into nothingness. We drifted forward, tethers taut between us. The deeper we went, the narrower the tunnel grew, until the ceiling pressed down like a lid, forcing me to tilt my head, chest aching as pressure built in my sinuses. My regulator hissed in measured rhythm, a metronome counting down our margin for error. Mud scuttled across the floor, uncovering stone slabs I'd never noticed on our first dive. The scanning light picked out a smear of red, fresh crimson, and I signaled blood to Ramirez. He flashed back the OK sign, though his mask trembled with the realization. We were on the teenager's trail. We followed the smear downstream, weaving through submerged steel support beams encrusted with algae. Each fin stroke scattered sediment, turning the water to a slurry that clawed at my vision. I felt the tunnel slope upward, as if dumping us toward an exit I couldn't yet see. Then the blood trail ended at a fallen wooden door, half off its hinges, door frame splintered. I tapped my torch against the wood. The echo was hollow, unnatural. The lock's metal bracket stuck out like a tooth. I keyed my radio. Entry point. Door obstructed. Silence answered. Communications still patchy this deep. I finned closer, knife drawn, and prized at the bracket. Splinters snapped. A cloud of debris surged around me. When it cleared, I saw the shadowed underside of the door's edge, and something darker beyond the warped planks. My heart throbbed. The tunnel opened into a chamber I hadn't known existed, its ceiling lost in darkness. The water was colder here, biting at every exposed seam of neoprene. I signaled Ramirez to follow, and we glided into the space. My light revealed rows of rusted pipes arching overhead like ribs. The blood on the door's frame ran in slender rivulets, pooling at our fins before drifting toward a yawning grate at the chamber's far end. A faint hum emanated from beyond that grate, like distant machinery humming to life. I approached, fins sweeping the floor, mind racing. Was this part of an old storm control system? Or had someone used the tunnel for something far more sinister? I pressed my palm to the grate's cool metal bars. Through the mesh, I glimpsed cables disappearing into the darkness, power lines feeding some unseen heart of this subterranean maze. My light caught on something wrapped around the bottom bar, a torn piece of his jacket, the familiar red and black plaid he'd been wearing in the surveillance footage. My breath caught in my throat. Evidence of his final moments lay right here, inches from my glove. I signaled, "Found jacket fragment," tagging it with an underwater evidence marker. But as I did, the grate vibrated, a slow, rhythmic pulse that matched the hum beyond. The water thrummed in response, sending tremors up my tether. Ramirez tapped my shoulder. "Something's moving in there." I shone my light through the bars, but visibility faded to nothing as a silt wave rolled in from the grate. The chamber dimmed, our beams swallowed whole. Then came the first bang, a pipe behind the grate shuddering as if struck by a fist. The second bang reverberated through the water, louder, setting our teeth on edge. I dropped to my knees in the mud to steady myself. My mask fluttered with each pulse. The hum escalated into a grinding roar, like gears meshing beneath the earth. My radio crackled once, twice, then died. The grate split inward under a burst of raw force. One bar snapped free, snapping me in the face as I reeled backward. The inside of the chamber beyond was a blur of dark shapes, long sinuous lengths of cable that writhed as though alive, coating the concrete walls in a slick so thick it defied description. The belt's fragment floated toward the opening, carried by the surge. I tried to bag it, but a new current surged outward, knocking me off my feet and sending me tumbling into Ramirez. He scrambled to upright, and we finned back to the chamber's threshold, lights darting madly. Behind us, the grate slammed shut with a clang that echoed like a gunshot, sealing us in that iron womb. My hand found the wreckage of the door bracket, our only exit. I slashed at it with my knife, sparks of rust flying, but the metal wouldn't yield. The cables beyond pulsed. I swear they flexed, as if something within the darkness was watching us, feeding off our fear. I took a deep breath, letting the regulator's hiss soothe my pulse. My dive light flickered, the battery running low. Air at 15%. Ramirez's gauge hovered at 10. We had one chance. Breach the bracket, force the door, and escape before our lights died. I jammed the knife into the crack and drove it home, levering with all my strength. Metal groaned. The grate shuddered. Through the gap, I could see the faint glow of dawn above the reservoir's surface, the promise of oxygen, of salvation. Behind that glow lurked something we could not understand, something that had used the reservoir's veins like arteries, pulsating with its own unknown life. The bracket bent enough for me to slip through. Ramirez dove past me, torch in hand, and we hurled ourselves toward freedom. The chamber behind us exploded in a surge of silt and sludge that roared through the gutted grate. We finned like madmen through the narrow tunnel, lungs burning, masks filling with grit. Every shadow seemed to reach for us. Every pressure change felt like a hand choking the regulator. When the tunnel finally spat us out into open water near the intake tower, We surfaced in a burst of bubbles, gasping, ragged, hearts racing. On the boat deck, hands grabbed us, straps were loosened, and oxygen masks slapped onto our faces. The daylight seared my vision as I lay back, staring up at the sky, every instinct screaming that we'd faced something not meant for human eyes. I coughed, trying to clear the taste of iron in my mouth, and noticed Ramirez staring into the murk behind our boat. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. "Did you see it?" he rasped. I shook my head, though the memory of those writhing cables, pulsating like veins, would chase me long after my air had run out. My console beeped. Air still at 5%. We'd pushed our limits and survived. But somewhere in that submerged cathedral, something remained. And as I watched Ramirez slump to the deck, I realized that finding evidence was no longer enough. We'd awakened what slept in the reservoir's belly, and it had tasted our fear. I forced myself upright on the boat's deck as the medics swarmed Ramirez, fixing his mask and checking his vitals. I'd kicked us clear of that tunnel's mouth, but the echo of those pulsing cables clung to my bones. My dry suit still hissed with trapped air as I tugged off my gloves, inspecting them for tears, proof that something in the depths had grabbed at me. The boat rocked gently beneath my weight, but I felt every vibration in my chest. "Leader to base," I croaked into my wrist radio. My voice sounded wrong, hoarse with salt water and adrenaline. "We've extracted the evidence pouch. Jacket fragment and notebook secured. Turbine flow extreme. Recommend no further dives until structural review." My words crackled in the cold air before the comm unit spat back static. Behind me, the reservoir's surface shimmered in the rising sun, a pale promise of safety. Yet I knew better. The water still hid its secrets below 40 feet, where pressure and silence ruled. I glanced down at my gauges. Air at 5%. My last breaths spent fighting a current that felt almost sentient. My tether lay coiled at my feet, the faint glow of its marker beacon flickering like a dying star. They helped me back to the caged safety perch while Ramirez coughed, returning a torrent of black water. His eyes met mine, hollow, afraid, yet alive. No words passed between us. None were needed. We'd both felt that presence coiling around the pipes, pulsing with the rhythm of our heartbeats. I unclipped the evidence pouch and handed it to the Marine tech. As he sealed it, I noticed something drifting in his beam of sunlight. My reference beacon, the small yellow flare attached to my tether, once clicking reliably underwater to guide me back. Now, dangling by its frayed clip, it shone only once before spluttering to silence. I stared at the darkened beacon, its absence of pulse speaking louder than any alarm. It should have kept clicking, thousands of simple beats guiding us home. Yet somewhere, beneath the twisted grate, it had been snuffed out. "Leader," the Marine tech called. "You okay?" He offered me a hand. I raised mine, feeling the tremor that had followed me to the surface. Protocol said I needed rest, debrief, mental evaluation. But I knew this dive wasn't over. Its echo would chase me, dragging me back beneath the surface's still beauty. I closed my eyes and breathed in the crisp air. The reservoir looked serene, flat, calm, innocent. But down there, in that floodlit chamber, something had changed. A living current had woven itself into the pipes, animating the dead carcass of the deer, dragging the teenager's last tracks into a silent cathedral of metal. My pulse quickened as a single thought pulsed through me with the force of underwater boom. The dive team's sonar buoys had all gone dead at the same time. Every one of them flickering into silence just as the grate split. And on deck, the reference beacon's final click had stopped, leaving only darkness between us and that chamber's mouth. I opened my eyes. The water's edge beckoned, glinting like a silver noose. Ramirez's quiet groan pulled me back, but I knew I'd answer that summons again. We never truly surface until the silence answers us. I couldn't stay on deck any longer. As Ramirez was led to the med tent, I peeled off my helmet and grabbed my dive mask, my fingers still trembling from the aftershocks of panic and adrenaline. My team watched in stunned silence. None dared argue. Without a word, I climbed back into the gear, strapping on weights and connecting hoses. The morning sunlight was harsh on my eyes, but the reservoir's surface called to me, its mirror-like calm belying the violence beneath. I slipped off the boat's edge for the 5th time, the cold water swallowing me in a shock of relief. My lungs expanded with a hiss as the regulator sealed. No failures this time. I checked my air, 200 bar. Enough, I hoped, to confront whatever still pulsed in the deep. My tether trailed behind like a lifeline, and I tightened my grip on the slate marker tied to my vest. I signaled the coxswain, descending to chamber. His nod translated into slack line as I finned downward. Past 30 feet, the daylight faded, and the intake tower's distorted silhouette rose like a sunken fortress. I followed the broken grate's edge to the service tunnel entrance upstream, weaving through the same submerged arch that had nearly killed us. The bloodstains on the doorframe were gone, washed away by the surge, but the splintered wood remained, a silent testament. I jammed my light into the gap and forced the door wider, dragging metal shavings from my glove. Inside, the chamber stretched into darkness. The beam of my torch struck the rusted pipes, alighting their slick surfaces in a pale glow. My breathing sounded too loud in my mask, the regulator's hiss frantic. I tapped Ramirez's call sign into the comm. Echo chamber, confirm presence. No answer. Everything was eerily still, the hum gone. My skin crawled with the absence of sound. I edged deeper, cane-like steel ribs arching overhead. The cold intensified, seeping through every seam. Then my light caught on something curved against the far wall, the teenager's notebook, wedged between two pipes, pages fluttering in the slow current. I approached, mind racing, and pried it free. The cover read, April the 22nd. Inside, his final scrawl, "If I don't make it, know this place is alive." My throat clenched. Alive? That had sounded like guilt or madness. Now it felt like a confession. I bagged the notebook and pivoted back toward the grate, but my beam flickered, battery low. I switched to my backup light, the beam narrow and jittery. I glanced at my air, 150 bar. Still safe, but the gauge's needle trembled in my peripheral vision. I shone the light on the cables writhing behind the grate. Only they weren't there. The chamber was empty, no cables, no pulsing, just silent pipes and the debris of our previous chaos. My heart hammered. The notebook's message echoed in my mind, alive. Something had animated the carcass, somehow used the infrastructure like veins. The absence of those cables now felt like a trap, emptiness where we expected threat. I sank to one knee in the sludge, leaning on my slate marker for support. The notebook's plastic pouch pressed against my chest through the bag, solid proof that a boy had perished here. Then the grate trembled, so faint I almost missed it. A single bar bent outward, groaning softly, as if under pressure from within. I shone my light through the narrowing gap. Darkness stirred beyond, a roiling mass of shadow that seemed to breathe. I flicked my light upward, catching the slim line of surface light, my path home, but the shadow pulsed toward me as if aware. I backpedaled, but the chamber floor was slick. My fin clipped a pipe, sending me sprawling into mud. The notebook flew from my pouch, landing open on the floor. Pages fluttered to a page I hadn't bagged yet. A hastily drawn schematic of the tunnel's pipes, notes in the teenager's handwriting marking a spot where the water hums. The hum was back, low and deep, vibrating through the steel. My teeth chattered as I crawled to the grate, jamming my knife into the gap to lock it shut. Just when I thought it might hold, the sound ramped up. A droning reverberation that shook the chamber like an earthquake. My mask vibrated against my face. I whipped my light around, searching for movement, for anything tangible to focus on. But the beam caught only mud and discarded PPE, our own equipment, scattered like refuse. My gauge ticked down. 120 bar. Too much time spent in horror. I pried the grate further, urged myself to stand. The notebook lay in the beam, its schematic mocking me with knowledge I was too afraid to apply. I clipped the bag closed, slung it over my shoulder, and turned for the exit. As I reached the doorway, my backup light flickered again. Last breath of a dying star. Darkness closed in around me. The hum crescendoed into a single, vibrating note that thrummed through my bones. I surged forward, fins pounding the broken door's frame, and kicked for the archway. Then everything stopped. Silence swallowed the hum, and my light died, plunging me into total blackness. I clawed at the broken door frame, heart in my throat, and whispered into the void, "Can anyone hear me?" I pushed off the boat's hull one last time, plunging into the abyss as the world above dissolved into ink. My lungs filled with hiss and chill, every fin stroke a battle against the current that now felt deliberate, almost sentient. I flicked on my torch. Its beam sharpened into the darkness, carving out a narrow tunnel through the sediment-laden water. My tether trailed behind, a lifeline I barely trusted, its line taut as though something below gripped it. Air at 180 bar, plenty for a quick run. I eased past the intake tower's broken grate and into the service tunnel's yawning mouth. The walls here bore new scars, fresh gouges in the brick like claws scraped along their length, too deep and uneven to be from tools. I tapped my slate marker against the nearest pipe. No echo. The silence pressed in, heavy as a tomb. I scanned the chamber. The pipes loomed overhead, encrusted with layers of grime that dripped slow droplets into the sludge beneath. I drifted toward the spot where I'd found the notebook, only to see it vanished. No plastic pouch, no waterlogged pages. My heart seized. Someone, or something, had retrieved it. I signaled clear, but my comm unit crackled only back static. A rumble rolled through the tunnel, a low seismic growl that shook me in my boots. I kissed the metal side of my regulator, steeling myself. I had to know. I kicked forward, silt erupting in my wake until visibility collapsed to a finger's breadth. The rumble morphed into a steady pulse, synchronized with my own heartbeat. I followed it, each beat guiding me deeper until I reached the grate's interior. Through the slits in the bars, I saw it. The cables, coiled like massive serpents, thrummed with a phosphorescent glow. They writhed against the metal walls, pressing outward as if straining to burst free. Between their coils, something flickered, an eye. No, a reflection of my own torch. Yet the cables moved with purpose, shifting in and out of the beam's path, mimicking living tissue. My teeth chattered. I raised my light for a better angle, but the cables recoiled, vanishing into the gloom. A single strand, thicker than my arm, uncoiled and slithered toward me, brushing the grate with a soft scrape that resonated like a warning. I lashed out with my knife, striking the metal, but the blade shattered against the cable's core. Sparks of synthetic fiber drifted like embers in the water before extinguishing instantly. I stumbled back, fins catching on a pipe, and banged my hand on the grate. My flashlight spun wildly, illuminating the chamber in stuttering flashes. In one burst, I glimpsed a shape, the teenager's form, translucent and receding, as though captured between water and memory. He drifted toward the grate, arm outstretched, mouth opening in a silent plea. Then the next flash revealed emptiness. No boy, no notebook, only the writhing cables. I gulped salt water and activated my Octo's purge button, clearing my mask just in time to see the grate begin to warp, its bars bending outward under unseen force. I kicked for the exit, but the current reversed, slamming me against the ribs of the tower's interior with crushing pressure. My air sizzled at 90 bar. I'd stayed too long. Desperation clawed at me. I jammed my knife into the bent bars, levering them as the tunnel's roar crescendoed. Silt surged down like cataracts, blinding me. My torch flickered into its final pulse, casting the chamber in stark silhouettes. Cables choked with debris, pipes torn from their mounts, and impossibly, a ledger. A heavy leather-bound book, resting on the sludge. Pages blank, save for one phrase scrawled in the boy's handwriting. "We never left." My spine froze. The words pulsed with a rhythm that matched the mechanical heart of the reservoir itself. I hauled myself through the widening gap, lungs burning. As I burst into open water, I felt the current shift, welcoming me back like a tide that's weighted. I shot upward, a frantic kick that carried me through the silt-choked column until my hand broke the surface in a riot of bubbles. I was hauled into the boat's cradle, coughing, chest heaving. Above me, the sun had fully risen, painting the reservoir in tranquil blues and golds. But I saw only the recorders blinking, the rescue team's masks, and the flat, unbroken water beyond. They asked where the notebook was. I opened my mouth to answer, but found my throat gone silent. In my jacket pocket lay only the ledger, the blank book with that final message. I stared at it in disbelief as the dive boss snapped it shut, sealing it in an evidence bag. No journal, no scrawled maps, no proof of the boy's final moments. Only emptiness and that haunting line, "We never left." They told me it was a clerical error, that the notebook was lost in transit. I said nothing. I couldn't explain that in this reservoir, alive with cold steel veins and memories that wouldn't drift away. We were never simply observers. We were the latest guests in its deepest cathedral, and it was not inclined to let us go. I'd been diving long enough to trust the line, but not so long that the dread ever left me. Every fin stroke stirred up particles that drifted like carrion in a funeral breeze. I could feel the weight of the water pressing in on my chest, reminding me that gravity works differently here. Pressures build and minds fray. The reservoir's bottom had claimed more than one overconfident diver. 3 knocks. I tapped the line, my knuckles numb. Specialist Reyes answered with a single, thinning rap. We were synced, silent partners in this grim waltz. Ahead, a faint glint caught the beam, rusted metal that shouldn't be here. I edged closer, heart stuttering, and discovered the remnants of an old car frame, its door hanging at an angle as if frozen in mid-escape. A kick of my boot loosened a sliver of glass, which drifted upward in slow motion, like an offering to some submerged god. I checked my pressure gauge, 1500 ESE. Plenty for the search, but I felt the burn of anticipation in my lungs. Behind me, the SEMB line protested, a soft tug that spoke of unseen currents. I signaled Reyes to follow the line's secondary arm, leading toward the dam intake. That's where they'd found the boil on the surface, the only clue to what lay beneath. We descended a slanted concrete wall, water temperature dropping by the second. My ears popped, and I clenched my jaw against the pain. Visibility shuddered again, down to a few inches, only darkness pierced by my beam. Then the torque of the current hit, pushing me sideways. I clawed at the wall, boots scrabbling against the algae. My gloves slipped. A frigid hand of panic gripped my gut. This current wasn't in the dive plan. "Reyes," I tapped code, but my signal sounded muffled. He answered with a burst of static that rattled my mask. Ahead, a silhouette emerged, a shape too angular to be natural. A boat hull, its surface pitted and barnacled. I knelt on the slick concrete, hair swirling in the current. As I brushed aside a curtain of weed, I saw the outline of a person. Slumped, face pressed to the steering wheel, eyes staring lifeless into the void. My heart thudded. I keyed the comms. "We've got a body at Del Plus 20. No response came except a low hum of my own regulator. I tapped my flashlight, illuminating a wedding ring glinting on the man's finger. The floating silt turned red around the brass circle. I bit out, "Bag deploy," but my voice echoed in a vacuum of dread. Reyes finned over, and together we rigged the lift bag to the frame. As I strapped the strap, the silt stirred violently, like something exhaled. My beam tremored, revealing the corner of a child's toy lodged in the broken ashtray. A miniature plastic figure, its arms outstretched, drifted in circles. That wasn't part of the case files. My throat went dry. I punched the inflate valve. The bag billowed, lifting the car and its inhabitant, but the current surged in a roaring backwash that flung silt and debris like shrapnel. I lost sight of Reyes in the cloud. My fingers curled around the sembline, seeking reassurance. The reservoir floor dropped away, and I felt the line slip through my grasp. Adrenaline snapped me upright. I yanked at the tangled hose of my buoyancy compensator, fighting to stay anchored. Then, a metallic groan echoed off the dam wall. Not a lift bag, but something else giving way. My heart hammered. I flicked my light toward the sound and caught a flash of movement. A long pipe snapping free, tumbling toward me like a spear. I rolled aside, finning hard. My regulator rattled in alarm. Up above, I imagined teammates straining at the winch line, watching the surface churn. But down here, time slowed. My pressure gauge hit 1200 psi. I could surface now, report the anomaly. But duty pulled me forward. The victim's family deserved closure, and I owed them more than a partial save. I hit the throttle on my fins, aiming toward the incline ladder we'd rigged back to the hatch. Every meter gained felt like wading through molasses. The muffled sound of my own breath became a drumbeat in my ears. My mask straps tightened against my skull as the pipeline crash repeated, closer this time, like the cracking of a giant's knuckles. I neared the ladder. Reynolds' light bobbed above in the gloom. Relief surged, but as I reached for the rung, my sembline snapped taut, slamming me into the concrete face of the dam intake. Pain flared across my shoulder. I gasped through the regulator, saw bubbles slip around the mask skirt. My hand found the ladder rung, and I hauled myself up, dragging the lift bag with every ounce of strength. My fingers brushed the edge of the hatch. A final surge of current snatched the line again, rattling my tether. I slammed the hatch lever, felt water sluice through the lock. With a grunt, I kicked upward, bursting into a column of pearly bubbles. The hatch slammed shut, plunging me into darkness once more. But this time, I could breathe air. On deck, the medic handed me a cup of coffee, steam swirling in the dawn light. I could taste the grit of silt on my lips. Behind me, the reservoir surface calmed, hiding its secrets. I sat on the gunwale, chest heaving, every ounce of my being trembling. I kicked off the hatch of the subway vent and slipped beneath the murky current, the cold water of the north side tunnel swallowing my legs before I even hit bottom. My regulator crackled with approval as I pressed my mask to the steel grate of the hatch, peering through a film of algae at the grid of tunnel rails below. The last trace of daylight lay far behind me now. Only the dull throb of my tank gauge and the steady clang of my fins against the rails broke the silence. I dropped down onto the curved rail bed, boots finding purchase on slick, algae-coated metal ties. I marked the line behind me, a bright orange tracer in the gray gloom, to guide us out. Diver Tomlin was just a silhouette in my peripheral beam, finning softly through disturbed silt and half-submerged debris. Echo check. I tapped the rail with my steel-knuckled glove. 3 taps answered me, reassuring and human. Visibility hovered at a few feet. My light cut a narrow cone through the turbidity, illuminating clouds of suspended silt that swirled like spirits in a disturbed pond. The curved tunnel walls rose overhead, black water dripping from corroded pipe collars, and every surface carried years of decay, rust rivulets, peeling paint, warped steel. I glanced at my gauge, 1,600 PSE, plenty for a routine survey, but I felt the familiar squeeze of anticipation in my chest. Our mission: find the missing teenager, charted by a faint cell ping near the old service junction. We edged forward, tapping the wall every few seconds to confirm the line's path. With each tap, the sound reverberated down the tunnel like distant gunfire, haunting. Empty? Somewhere ahead, the current swirled around a collapsed section, trapping freight cars in wedged positions. I steadied myself on the rail, scanning for handholds. My gloved fingers closed around a flaking beam, then slipped on an oily film. I cursed silently and kicked off, trusting my buoyancy to keep me level. Branch in 50 meters, Tomlin's light bobbed ahead. I followed and found the side passage, marked only by rusted switchgear and a broken signal lamp. I tapped the junction thrice before kicking into the branch, current tugging at my legs. My compass spun wildly as water eddied around the corner, but I forced my will to stay on course. The branch sloped downward, and I descended toward the cavernous chamber where the flooding had settled like a toxic sea. I felt the walls tighten as the chamber's arch roof arched lower, silt clouds kicked up by my fin strokes, drifting like phantoms. My mask skirt bit into my cheeks with every inhale. A lone sonar ping echoed, my dive computer searching for obstacles. I waited for the return, but nothing came back. No echo meant open water or a cavern too small to reflect. My heart thumped. We used those pings like a blind diver's eyes. Without the echo, we were ghosts in a concrete tomb. A distant murmur crackled through my comms. Tomlin's voice filtered through static. "Got something down here." My light swung in his direction, catching on the flicker of a child's sneaker tangled in cables. I approached slowly, finning with care. The sneaker bobbed like a buoy, laces frayed around rusted pipe. I recognized its size, too small for any adult victim. Anxiety knotted in my gut. I signaled Tomlin to back off while I surveyed the area. My beam revealed an overturned commuter car. Its roof collapsed under tunnel rubble. Windows shattered, upholstery shredded by debris. I tapped the body's silhouette 3 taps. No response. My pulse spiked. I keyed body at -20. Voice calm but thin. The thought of pulling out a lifeless form filled me with dread. I rigged the lift bag to the passenger door handle, barnacles and mud clinging to my gloves. My breathing caught as a silt plume erupted behind me, triggered by unseen movement. I froze, regulator clenched in my mouth. The plume settled to reveal something impossible. A small doll, its porcelain face intact, floating upside down in the water like a suspended sentinel. Its painted eyes stared at me. I swallowed water-tinged dread and forced myself to focus. Task first, horror later. I punched the inflate valve. The bag billowed, lifting the car with a groan of stressed steel. As I kicked toward the rail line, the water trembled, an aftershock of pressure shifting. My hand line jerked violently, and I lost sight of the lift bag for a heartbeat that stretched like an eternity. My chest tightened. I knew that the slightest disorientation here could mean becoming lost in an underwater labyrinth. I reached for the guideline and missed. Panic flared. My regulator fluttered, a warning of low air as the needle dipped below 1200 PZ. Labored breaths rattled in my ears. I toggled to emergency reserve but kept moving, following the faint glow of the SMA line markers. My fins kicked faster, stirring the silt into blinding curtains. I could barely see the line ahead. Suddenly, a harsh metallic screech rang out, a rail segment grinding as more rubble above shifted. Debris rained down. A cascade of broken tiles and pipes clattered around me. I pressed against the tunnel wall, mask pressing painfully into my face. My skin crawled as shards of broken tiles scraped my shoulder through the wetsuit. I heard my own ragged breathing echo back at me. The rubble settled. Silence reclaimed the space, but it felt alive, expectant. My air gauge read 950 PSE. I signaled Tomlin to confirm his safety. No answer. Only the dull pulse of water currents in my ears. My beam swept the darkness. His light was gone. My heart pounded. I tapped the line and kicked toward what I hoped was the main corridor. Panic clawed at my focus. Each fin stroke became a gasp for control. Minutes, seconds blurred. Then, as the line angled upward, I caught Tomlin's light flickering in the gloom. Distant, unsteady. Relief vanished at the sight of his silhouette pinned between rails and debris, arms outstretched as if reaching for the surface. Blood trickled from a gash on his helmet. I lunged forward, grabbing his arm. His glove was slick with silt and something darker. "Tomlin," I rasped through the comms, but my voice felt swallowed by the darkness. He was unresponsive, lifeless eyes reflecting my beam. My chest tightened with guilt. We'd trained for this, a diver rescue under pressure. But training never simulates the wet weight of a dead man or the howl of regret when your partner goes silent. I began the rescue drill, hooking his harness and strapping him to my own lift bag. My hands trembled. My air gauge ticked past 800 SI. The sound of metal shifting echoed again, this time from behind me. Something large scraped across the tunnel's concrete floor. A pipe? A conduit? I spun, beam slicing through silt, but saw nothing. Just shadows writhing at the edge of visibility. My regulator fluttered louder, a higher-pitched strain that warned of impending failure. Panic bloomed fully. I snapped my torch to full beam, illuminating the tunnel in harsh white light. The walls receded, a narrowing funnel of concrete and steel. My fins kicked once, twice, a desperate dash for the main line. I slipped beneath the floodlit surface of the old Norfolk Pier, the tide tugging at my fins as though the water itself tried to pull me back. My light beam cut through the brackish gloom, illuminating barnacled pilings and drifting debris. Above me, the pier's wooden deck groaned faintly with the weight of the search crew, their voices muffled through the comms. "2 divers down. Watch your lines. Keep tight." I felt the cool bite of the water through my suit, the temperature settling into a bone-deep chill that made every movement an effort. We were hunting a missing boater, the owner of a pleasure craft flipped by unexpected currents, and I took point, line reel in hand. Each fin stroke sent silt swirling in slow-motion clouds. Visibility was maybe 5 feet, but between pilings the currents intensified, swirling like tiny whirlpools that threatened to sweep us into the tangled maze of support beams. Pylon 30 mark. I tapped the reel, noting the distance. My compass wavered in the distorted magnetic field near the rusted pilings. Ahead, I caught the ghostly shape of the overturned hull, half buried in mud. I slowed my approach, mind racing through the recovery drill. Find the body, rig lift, exit before air runs low. At the hull's edge, the mud was thick, almost viscous, clinging to my boots and gloves as I brushed aside silt. A glint of metal caught my beam, the latch of the bow storage locker. My heart thudded. If he'd taken shelter inside, this must be where we'd find him. I forced the latch open, feeling a snap as corroded hinges gave way. My light spilled inside to reveal a jumble of fishing gear, an empty life jacket tangled in netting, and then a form crumpled against the hull's metal interior. I tapped my mask. 1, 2 taps. No response. As I reached for the victim's harness, the current shifted violently, funneling between 2 pilings and slamming me sideways. My regulator flared, bubbled with each rapid inhale, and my mask skirt pinched more tightly as water pressure surged. I fought to keep my footing, toes digging into the slick mud at the pier's base. My gloved hand closed on nylon straps, blood seeping into the fibers. I secured the lift bag's straps under the victim's shoulders. The bag knocked against the hull like a wounded animal. I squeezed open the inflate valve. The bag filled, lifting the body with a groan of stressed metal and popping upholstery. Fine debris cascaded around us. Broken shell fragments, splintered wood, tufts of seaweed. My beam danced over the scene, catching on a child's plastic bucket, its handle twisted, stained with mud. Behind me, Specialist Ruiz signaled, "Line snagged." I turned to see his line caught on a crossbeam. He worked to free it, kicking water away methodically. I checked my gauge, 1100 psi. Plenty for ascent, but this environment punished hesitation. The lift bag snagged on a broken plank jutting from the hull's frame. I finned around to push it free, silt erupting in a slur of gray. My mask filled with murk. I coughed bubbles through the regulator as I clawed for clear space. Finally, the bag broke loose and began its slow ascent. I hoisted the tether line, guiding it upward. Ruiz surfaced first, dragging his line as he bobbed in the choppy tide. I followed, the hood of my suit brushing against the submerged pier deck, bumping me as if urging me to hurry. My fingers closed around the lift bag's line, and I started pulling us both up, mindful of my own ascent rate. Near the surface, the water brightened, outlines of deck boards and the underside of the pier. I kicked harder, hauling the body into the open, then kicked clear of the pier supports. My hood snagged on a spike of barnacled wood. I twisted free, ripping my suit. A sudden twinge of pain flared along my thigh. Nothing dangerous, but enough to remind me how easily underwater operations can turn grim. I broke the surface with a gasp, water sluicing from my mask. Crew hands grabbed the victim, hauling him aboard. The deck pitched as the tide rocked the boat, and I fought to remain steady. My comms crackled. "Rig the stretcher. Get him warm." They hauled me up next, mask clattering off as I coughed in the cold air. I handed off the lift bag line, breathing hard, chest heaving. Behind me, the next team prepared for a second dive, lines coiling on deck. I surveyed the pier's shadowed pilings, recalling how close the current had nearly pinned us. My shoulder ached from the trot of the surge, Adrenaline still hummed in my veins. I watched the lift bag bob, tangled in broken decking beneath the surface, then flipped my regulator purge to clear the mouthpiece. A cracked, hollow click resonated through the water pipe beneath the deck. A soft, ominous whisper that something had shifted again in those corroded support beams. I found myself drawn back to the edge of the pier before I even realized I'd surfaced. The click from the water pipe under the deck echoed in my mind like a summons. I climbed back into the boat's hull and inspected my gear with shaking hands. Harness straps, regulator seals, tank valves. Everything seemed intact, but the doubt had already crept in. Specialist Ruiz gave me a curt nod. We both knew the procedure. If the deck supports were unstable, the dive could collapse without warning. Yet the missing boater's family needed answers. I suited up again, the neoprene hugging my skin like a second shell. The deck lights above me cast wavering shadows on the water, and I imagined the barnacled supports creaking, sighing under unseen strain. As I slipped below, the murky current grabbed at my legs, tossing me toward the pilings. My beam cut a path through the grit. The lift bag from the previous dive bobbed gnarled in the wreckage, ropes wrapped tight around a decayed beam. I finned closer, examining the tangle. Rusted metal bit into the webbing, threatening to tear the bag open if I yanked too hard. I anchored myself to a stable piling and began working to free the bag. My gloves scraped against rough wood, and silt exploded from the seams in a choking cloud. My regulator fluttered as I yanked the strap, but the bag held fast. I signaled Ruiz for assistance. His light bobbed into view as he finned around the obstruction. Together, we twisted and pried, feeling the weight of cold water and the loom of darkness bearing down. Finally, with a wet rip, the bag jerked free and drifted upward, only to snag on a second beam farther off. We exchanged a glance. Two free divers surrounded by hidden traps beneath the pier. I kicked toward the tangle, each fin stroke stirring a maelstrom of sediment. My fins struck something solid, an angular frame that wasn't part of the pier's original structure. I ran my gloved hand across it, a jagged edge of metal, bent and warped, with fresh scrape marks. It looked like part of a boat trailer hitch, embedded in the piling at an odd angle. Blood? The dark smear clung to the metal, and I swallowed. We have more here than just the victim. I tapped on my tank valve. And it looks recent. Ruiz circled behind me, his beam illuminating a wedge of planking that had sheared off the deck above. The wood was splintered at a cruel angle, nails protruding like teeth. I realized with a cold stab that the structure had begun to fail, and likely before our first dive. The missing boater might have sought refuge under that plank, only to be crushed as supports shifted. My throat tightened. This was no simple recovery. It was a scene of disaster we were now uncovering. I signaled for the surface to haul the body and debris out again, but the comms crackled only static. My throat burned as I pumped my VHF toggle. Nothing. Panic flickered. I checked my air, 900 psi, far below the safe turnaround. I hit the reserve and toggled the purge. No sound. My regulator was dead. I snapped to manual mode, but the hissing faltered. Every second counted. I needed to find Ruiz and get to the ladder before I ran out completely. My light bobbled as I kicked up from the silt layer. Frantic, I scanned for his beam. The twisted hitch frame loomed close, and behind it the barnacled pilings dripped with detritus. Then I saw Ruiz's silhouette, pinned between a jangling mass of ropes and broken decking. He fought to free himself, arms thrashing at snaring lines. "Ruiz!" I banged my tank valve in Morse. Long, short, long, hoping he'd respond. He twisted toward me, mask askew, mouthpiece blocked by silt. I bent over, ripping at the lines with desperate urgency. As I worked, a low rumble shuddered through the water, vibrating my fins against the mud. The pilings gyrated, sending a shiver up my spine. I felt the shift in my gut. The deck supports above were moving, failing right now. Water pressure pushed me sideways, and I almost lost my footing on the muddy bottom. My heart slammed against my ribs as I tore at the binding ropes and netting around Ruiz's torso. His harness buckles gleamed in my light, slick with grime. Finally, they gave. He lurched free, gasping out through the mask. I latched an arm under his shoulder strap and signaled for us to ascend. Every fin stroke was agony as my chest burned for air I couldn't trust. Behind me, the rumble intensified. A shower of wooden shards and nails rained down from the deck above. I felt something razor-sharp graze my thigh through the suit, pain blossoming like a red flower. I kicked harder, dragging us toward the ladder line. The lift bag drifted past, snagged but still afloat, a ghost of our earlier recovery. The current shifted again, stronger this time, pushing us toward a cluster of pilings that closed in like a steel cage. The rumble became a roar, and the broken deck collapsed, sending a cascade of debris into the water. Planks, beams, wreckage that thudded all around. I saw Ruiz's wide eyes in my beam, terror mirrored in his gaze. "I'm out," he tapped. His air gauge must have gone dry too. I checked mine. 600 posse, we were out of time. I reached for the ladder, fingers brushing cold metal rungs. Ruiz grabbed beside me and we began climbing, limbs throbbing, lungs begging for air. Then, the last thing I expected. The ladder shuddered and snapped. We clung to the broken hatch frame as water and debris rushed in, narrowing our space. My tank whined, 400 PZ. The rumble above turned into a final crash as the deck gave way completely. Wood and barnacles shattered through the surface, blocking the hatch opening. My heart pounded in my ears as Ruiz and I exchanged a look of primal fear. I flicked my light at him, then down at my gauge, then back at the shattered hatch. I pushed my tank valve open, releasing a spurting hiss that mingled with the distant roar of collapsing timbers above. The broken hatch jammed us in place. Ruiz and I crouched in a pocket of muted green light, water sloshing across the deck plates overhead. My hand trembled as I tapped the frame, trying to clear debris that pinched watercraft lines against the hatch rim. Each attempt flared fresh sediment into my mask skirt, constricting the narrow beam of my flashlight until only a blur remained. My gauge flashed 300 pi. Panic writhed in my chest, but training kicked in. Locate an alternate egress, conserve air, maintain calm. I felt along the hatch's edge for any gap, any weak point. My gloved fingers found a seam where the metal had bent, likely under the pressure of the collapse. I wedged a steel pry-bar between hull plating and hatch flange, bracing my shoulder against the jammed timber above. My lungs burned as I rocked the bar back and forth. Each shift of debris above sent a shower of rotting wood particles raining down, punctuated by the groan of oak beams succumbing at depth. Ruiz finned beside me, eyes wide in the dim, unblinking gaze of his mask. He tugged at a dangling bundle of nets and ropes caught on a jagged pilaster. "Got to clear this, then we can leave her," he tapped out, voice tinny through the comms. I nodded, though I barely hear the reply through the regulator's static. I wedged harder, pain lancing through my shoulder as the pry bar bit into corroded metal. The hatch shifted. A chunk of wood broke free above, splinters skittering across my hood. With a final heave, the bar snapped free, metal giving way with a hollow clang. The hatch edge shifted a half-inch, and I shoved, feeling the cold slide of metal against metal. Water flooded in around the breach, rolling into waves that slapped my chest. I braced my boots against the deck, driving my shoulder into the hatch until at last the frame released. The hatch plate fell inward, jamming the collapse further but opening a narrow slot to the exterior. I kicked toward the opening, dragging Ruiz with me. Our torsos wedged halfway through before a surge of current yanked us backward. I clutched his harness, fighting the drag as water rushed through the new breach. Silt churned, reducing my light to an angry orb of gray. The deck timbers above creaked, wood fibers popping as the support structure continued its ruinous descent. My gauge flickered at 200 PA. The air in my lungs felt like ice. I toggled to reserve, heart hammering. I punched the purge on my regulator. Silence. The second stage had flooded. My breath caught. I tapped my mask skirt, trying to clear water. My ears sang with the muffled rush of the outside current, then a sudden suction as something clamped around my left fin, a length of twisted netting. I kicked backward, tearing the mesh free, painfully pulling shards of barnacle from the neoprene. "Air's out," I gasped, tone hoarse. I signaled Ruiz. He gestured grimly, tank light flickering on 150 PC. His secondary regulator bobbed uselessly at his chest. We had to share. I reached for his octopus, but my arm brushed a loose length of rebar hanging from the deck above, sending a jolt through my shoulder. Leaning into the strain, I retrieved the octopus hose and offered it to Ruiz. He shook his head, eyes wide, no spare. His tank gauge dragged toward the empty. "Follow me," I tapped him, switching my comms to emergency channel. "We can't stay." I forced breath after breath, every inhale a reminder that the end could come at any moment. I finned toward the sliver of broken hatch plate, silhouette of the decomposing pier deck above outlining our exit. The current slammed into us, each forward stroke a battle. Just before the hatch, Ruiz's foot snagged on a splintered girder. He yanked free, but the motion sent him spinning toward an open throttle pipe, rusted, jagged, the kind that could shred a dry suit. I lunged, grabbing his shoulder, yanking him upright. My fingers brushed his mask strap, tight and slick with grime. He coughed bubbles through the regulator, masked eyes locking on me, pleading. We reached the hatch slot and squeezed through single file. My shoulder rammed into the jagged corner of the plate, igniting pain that lanced through my arm. I kicked hard, pushing into the flood of cold, brackish water that surged from the deck breach. My vision wavered as the current dumped me into open water beneath the pier's shadow. Ruiz was on my heels, dark form carved in the green gloom. Above, the broken hatch rim glinted dimly. I kicked for the surface entrance ladder, ribs burning. My mask leaked, water filling every gap as I finned the last few feet. My reserve air gave one final flutter in my ears, then silence. I gripped the ladder rung, hoisting myself into the murk-lit space between decking. As I pulled Ruiz up beside me, the pier's broken support beams groaned once more. A low, bone-chilling sound that suggested the entire structure teetered on collapse. We surfaced in the cold night air, gasping as crew hands seized us and dragged us onto the deck. I coughed up water and silt, tasting salt and rust. The beam lights flickered, illuminating the shattered hatch and the mangled timbers still sinking slowly back into the tide. Medic gloves pressed against my mask skirt, clearing the last of the mud. I looked back at the water. The broken hatch hung at an angle, water sluicing through it like a bleeding wound. Above, the pier's deck sagged grotesquely, supports bowing under their own weight. I swallowed hard as Ruiz lay coughing beside me, eyes unfocused but alive. I felt the cold trickle of blood along my thigh where the barnacles had torn me. Then, over the roar of the generator pumps, I heard it. A faint click, so soft I questioned if it was real. It came from the broken hatch below, metal pressing against metal, an echo of the ongoing collapse. I stared at that slot, as if the hatch itself might answer me. But there was only the hush of the tide and the dark promise of what still lay beneath. I held Ruiz's hand as medics swirled around us, hauling him onto the deck of the dive boat. My ribs burned where I'd pressed against the ladder in that final, desperate surge, but I barely noticed. Every nerve in my body thrummed with adrenaline and shock. Above us, the broken hatch gaped like an open wound in the pier's hull, water sluicing through in dark, pulsing waves. I should have felt relief, but instead my chest tightened with a cold dread that wasn't just from the tide. They strapped Ruiz onto a stretcher and began warming him under heat lamps. His eyes flicked at me, question and thanks mingling in that brief glance before he closed them against exhaustion. I stepped back, feeling the deck tipsy beneath my boots, the crew's voices muffled by the roaring pumps and the tide's relentless slap. My regulator lay silent between my fingers. No breath, no hiss, just the echo of every gasp I'd drawn in the darkness below. I knelt beside the hatch and peered down into the shaft of murk, flashlight's beam cutting a trembling wedge of visibility. The twisted rebar, the shattered netting, the dangling remains of the lift bag, all drifted in the current like macabre ornaments. My gloved hand hovered over the rim, as if I could feel the pressure of unseen things pressing up against the steel from below. I swallowed, tasting salt and rust on my tongue, the gritty tang of failure and survival intermingled. "Divers clear," the supervisor called, voice cracking over the comms. They wanted us off this rig, away from the collapsing structure before it gave way entirely. I stood and followed him, each step echoing hollowly on the metal deck. But my eyes kept drifting back to that gaping hole, as though something down there was calling me, something I hadn't yet seen, some shape that slipped beyond my flashlight's reach. They led me to the warming station, where blankets and hot drinks waited. I accepted a mug of coffee with trembling hands, the heat searing through my gloves. Every sip felt like swallowing embers, searing away the numbness that threatened to engulf me. I watched the steam curl into the night air, and my thoughts drifted back to the floodlit pier and the way the current had shifted just as we pried the hatch free. How it had seemed almost alive, resisting our escape. Across the deck, Ruiz sat propped up, hot pack pressed to his shoulder, breathing shallow and labored. I wanted to ask if he heard the click too, but the words stuck in my throat. He gave me a weak nod when our eyes met, the mutual acknowledgement of a near miss, of tokens exchanged on the brink between life and oblivion. But I sensed something else in his gaze, the same haunted curiosity that gnawed at my own resolve. The crew began dismantling lines and haulage cables. Generators whined as they drained the ballast tanks, and floodlights dimmed one by one. The boat lurched, tide shifting its angle. I stepped away from the hatch, but even as we sailed for shore, the image of those shifting pilings and the broken deck haunted me. Every time the boat tilted, I felt the weight of debris sliding beneath the water, heard the echo of timbers snapping like bones. I realized then that we hadn't merely escaped. We'd left something behind that still watched, waiting. On the ride back, the shoreline lights blurred as tears stung my eyes. Salt on salt. I clutched the coffee mug with knuckles white as the gasping breather of my tank. Around me, I could hear families calling out. Emergency sirens in the distance. The rhythm of cities unaware of the horrors beneath their calm surface. And I understood something chilling. Underwater darkness doesn't end when you reach the surface. It follows you. An echo in your bones. A click in your mind. As we docked, The medic unstrapped Ruiz and guided him toward the ambulance. I followed, but every step felt heavy, weighted by the questions we'd uncovered. The pier loomed in the distance, a fractured skeleton silhouetted against a moonlit sky. I wanted to burn it down, to erase the memory of its collapse, but I knew that wouldn't silence the labs of thought churning in my head. There would always be another dive, another mission, another dark water to probe. And every time I would carry the knowledge that beneath every murk lies something alive, something waiting to shift, to click, to ensnare. I lingered at the water's edge, boots sinking into wet sand, tasting brackish wind on my lips. The night was silent now, too silent, as though holding its breath. I glanced at my wrist gauge, 0. No more air, no more hisses, everything quiet. Yet, beneath the calm, I felt the current whispering, promising that the depths still held secrets we'd never retrieve, horrors we'd never see. I took a final sip of cold coffee, ground my teeth, and looked out over the black water. The waves stole the mug from my hand as I threw it into the tide. It shattered with a hollow clatter on submerged debris. I watched the foam swirl, heard that haunting click beneath the surface, and realized the pier's collapse wasn't the only thing that had failed. I hit the water at 04:30. The temperature was a shock, cold enough to steal my breath before my regulator even opened. I pressed my hand to the river's glassy surface, felt the slight swell, and kicked downward, the stealthy tug of the current greeting my fins like an unwelcome handshake. Light from my mask lamp painted the murky depths in narrow shafts, illuminating suspended particles that drifted like ghostly moths. Each exhaled bubble floated upward, punctuating the quiet with a soft stutter before popping at the surface. I checked my depth gauge, 17 feet, visibility just under 60 centimeters. Cold water stung my cheeks, and a sudden ache clamped around my chest as if warning me, "You're not on dry land anymore." I flexed my legs, practiced the slow, measured kicks that gave me control, then swept my beam across the riverbed. Muddy roots wavered like skeletal fingers, and the occasional glint of broken glass or discarded tire rim stashed itself among the weeds. Diver training had taught me to expect the unexpected, but nothing prepared me for the way silt could erase landmarks with every routine movement. "Bell, leader," I crackled into my throat mic. "I'm on site. Begin grid sweep along heading 110. Depth stable at 17. Copy, leader. Good luck down there." I exhaled slowly, listening to the hiss of my regulator mingling with the muted rush of current. The riverbed sloped gently downward at the bank's edge, then gave way to a trough choked with silt. Reports said the missing teen's canoe had overturned about 50 yards upstream. He'd disappeared in seconds, witnesses said, swallowed by the dark undercurrents. Surface searches found nothing. Now it was up to me and my dive team to map every inch of the bottom. I floated just above the bed, careful not to disturb the sediment. My beam caught on the overturned canoe first, orange fiberglass dulled by algae, the bow wedged under a tangle of logs and reed beds. I drifted closer, heart thumping. Even upside down, the craft looked like a hulking beast waiting to swallow me. I checked the straps on my chest harness, everything secure, and eased my way under the rim of the canoe. The murk closed around me, turning every pulse of my light into a distant star, each beam a reminder of how alone I was. "Leader, status," came the voice of Diver Jenkins in my ear. "On the canoe," I whispered. No sign of victim. Starting perimeter scan at 12 o'clock, radius 2 meters. I flicked off my rear strobe, no need to spook fish or draw unnecessary attention, and pivoted in place. My gloved hands brushed the hole. Thick silt clung to my fingers. I toggled my flashlight higher, illuminating a pale sneaker sole jutting from the mud. My chest tightened. I edged toward it, careful to keep my profile low, but my fin clipped a submerged branch. Silt exploded, swallowing my vision in a milky haze. My breathing hitched as panic fluttered at the edges of my mind. Force yourself calm, I thought. Count your breaths. 1, 2, 3. Slowly, the silt settled. My light re-established a narrow corridor of vision. The sneaker lay a foot from the hull, tethered to a tangled fishing line that snaked toward the riverbed's depression. I blinked against the water's cold and reached forward, brushing aside strands of algae until I uncovered the girl's paddle. Half buried, its blade pressed into the mud like a marker for her last moments. I let out a breath. Leader to bell. Found victim's paddle at 220 degrees, 2 meters out. Commencing direct search grid. Received, leader. I kicked off the canoe's rim, drifting beyond the craft into deeper water. Light wavered as I navigated through the plume of sediment that clung stubbornly to every surface. Below me, the riverbed dropped into a trench that ran parallel to the bank. The channel was deeper, darker, like a canyon carved into the earth. I angled downward, fins cutting sweeps through mud, pulse in my ears beating in time with the regulator's hiss. At 30 feet, the current was stronger. I angled my body head first, hands extended, probing the trench's wall. Roots and clay protruded in irregular outcroppings, each shadow a potential hiding spot. My beam caught a flash of white through the murk, fabric, denim, wrapped around a protruding root. I inched closer. The girl lay half submerged, face angled slightly upward, mouth open in a silent scream. Her hair fanned out behind her like dark, tangled seaweed. I exhaled so hard I felt bubbles bump against my mask. Guilt pressed on my ribs as I recognized the shape of her arms, how they clutched at nothing. Leader here, I've got a positive visual. Victim at 030 degrees, depth 32 feet. Understood. Prep the lift. I slung the neoprene straps of the lift, bag around her torso, careful of my buoyancy so I wouldn't tumble into the trench wall. The water's pressure pressed against my suit, and I thought of a surface air as a forgotten luxury. Something tenuous I'd be eager to suck down if I surfaced too suddenly. Every detail pressed in, the slick feel of silt on my gloves, the foam of bubbles tickling my mask, the constant background hum of rushing water and sonar pings from our search drones above. I secured the bag's inflator hose, double-checked the clip, then signaled to my tender. Within moments, I saw the bag bloom like an anemone, lifting the girl from her muddy cradle. As she drifted upward, her pale form passed through my beam, and I involuntarily reached out, only to have my gloved hand cut through empty water. Seconds later, I kicked back to the surface. The night air hit my face in a rush of sound. Team radios, boat engines, distant shouts. But down below, the river remained silent, as if swallowing the girl's story whole. I unbuckled my gear, heart hammering. My thoughts churned, the way her sneaker hung at an impossible angle, the deep depression of the trench where something unseen might still lurk. I flicked off my mask light and left the girl in the decon tray, expression frozen beneath a blanket. Above me, our lights bobbed on the river's surface like distant stars. I stared at the dark water beyond, where our grid still awaited. I inhaled twice, chest tight. Then I felt it, a sharp click from my regulator. Not a hiss or a bubble, but a mechanical snap that shouldn't have been there. My heart skipped. I tapped the mouthpiece, but silence answered. I tapped my mouthpiece again, but the click echoed in my skull before vanishing into the pressurized gloom. The regulator had locked, no hiss, no airflow. My lungs clenched. I yanked off my mask in one smooth motion, water flooding my eyes, and tried to breathe through my mouth. Nothing. Panic surged like a sudden current. Instinct took over. I reached to my backup octopus, fumbled the clips, and dragged it free. Salty water burned my throat as I jerry-rigged the secondary mouthpiece into place. Heart hammering, I cleared the old regulator from my mouth, spat out a spray of water, and latched onto the backup. Air flooded my lungs in a raspy gush, and I forced myself to settle into a deliberate rhythm. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Below me, the reservoir's tunnel entrance yawned like a black maw. I kicked toward it, each stroke kicking up silt that tinted the beam of my mask lamp in a swirling haze. The walls closed in around me, slick with mildew and encrusted with barnacles, the choke point looming just ahead. My depth gauge read 50 feet, and I could feel the weight of water pressing against every square inch of my suit. I draped one hand against the concrete rim of the tunnel's mouth and angled downward. The choking current tugged at my fins, urging me back to the open bay, but I forced my feet into a slow, precise flutter kick, inching my way into the narrow passage. The cross-section shrank until my shoulders brushed against coarse concrete. I pivoted sideways, craning my neck to keep the beam dead center. Light fractured across rough edges and moisture beads that transformed into star-like reflections when my lamp caught them just right. I sucked in a breath, a measured inhale, and exhaled through the octopus. My chest tightened as I pressed deeper into the tunnel. The beam shuddered across rusted rebar and graffiti tags smeared in phosphorescent algae. Somewhere above, the reservoir's surface rippled at a faint, distant echo. Then I heard it. A dull clang, metal on metal, reverberating through the concrete walls like a warning bell. My blood iced. I swept the beam to the source, downstream, where faint shapes of discarded boxes and plastic crates drifted in the gloom. Evidence storage containers, half submerged and swinging on brittle straps. I frowned. Standard procedure never allowed evidence lockers to leave dry land, let alone a sealed tunnel. My tender, Diver Ortiz, must have seen the shift in my buoyancy. "Leader, report," crackled his voice. I swallowed hard. Unauthorized locker enclosure at 45 meters, depth 52 feet. I'm going to investigate further. The beam shuddered as I edged closer. My fingers brushed against the frayed webbing of a box strap, and I exhaled, sending bubbles tumbling toward the surface. The smell of decay, damp earth, rust, mildew, slipped past my nose plug. I flipped my light higher, illuminating the side of the locker where a glint of metal caught the beam. Handcuffs, their linked rings splayed like the jaws of a trap. I reached out, the regulator's hiss and my heartbeat filling my ears, and unclipped the chain. It rattled as I lifted it, a death knell in miniature. Underneath, pinned with a rusted hook, lay a leather-bound notebook. Waterlogged pages bulged, ink bleared, but I saw enough. Dates, times, scribbled names. A coroner's report? A suspect's confession? I wasn't certain. "Leader to Bell," I whispered, voice tight. "I've secured potential evidence, handcuffs and a notebook, prepping to surface." As I turned, the beam fell across the tunnel's far wall, and I froze. There, emerging through the milky haze, was a handprint smeared in dark sludge. 5 fingers splayed like a warning. No glove, just bare skin, as if someone, or something, had pressed against the wall moments ago. My breath caught. "Leader?" Ortiz's voice was cautious. "What's your status?" I swallowed past a dry throat. I I need to get this back up first. I clipped the items into my cargo net and hit the inflator. The lift bag billowed, and with it, the notebook and cuffs began to rise. I followed, kicking along the locker's edge, the scummy fingers still etched into memory. As the gurgle of bubbles carried me toward the light shaft at the tunnel's mouth, I dared a glance back. The wall was smooth. No handprint, no smudge, just the dull concrete illuminated by my wavering beam. Up through the choke point I went, silt swirling like a phantom cloak. At the splash of the entrance, I bumped my head on the spillway's underside, bit my lip to keep from crying out, and flipped over. My tender caught me mid-ascent and secured the net. Back on the surface, I unhooked my gear, chest tight. The evidence locker lay half against the hull, silent. I looked out across the reservoir, where the lights of the bridge shone like pins on black velvet. A breeze stirred, whispering across the water. I reached out to the spillway ledge, brushing my fingers over damp concrete. In the dim light, I saw a dark smear, like wet mud. But when I touched it, my glove came away clean. I swallowed. After everything I'd seen down there, was my mind playing tricks? I turned to the shore team and cleared my throat. Let's get this to forensics. But as I stepped forward, my hand brushed my diving knife hilt. In the murk of my momentary afterthought, I felt a pulse of cold dread. Whatever left that bloody handprint could still be watching from below. I kicked off the boat's ladder and slipped beneath the bay's surface. The night swallowed me whole. My mask lamp flared to life, illuminating a shifting field of plankton that drifted like embers in the gloom. I checked my gauge, depth 3 feet, and fired a burst of bubbles that chased one another upward, popping against the underside of the wooden pier. I swam forward, arms slicing through water that tasted faintly of salt and decay. The pilings loomed above me, knotted with barnacles and sheathed in slimy algae, each one a pillar rising into darkness. My fins nudged the silt, sending ghostly clouds billowing, and for an instant I lost sight of the pier's grid. I exhaled to clear the lenses, heart thudding against my ribs. Below the dock deck, the water darkened into a corridor. I angled downward, tracing the line of shadow where the wooden beams met the water line. The beams formed a cage, and the deeper I went, the tighter it felt, as if the pier itself conspired to trap me. My light picked out twisted ropes, rusted hooks, and the bleached skeleton of a small trawler wedged between supports. "Bell, leader," I whispered, entering pier grid. Depth 12 feet, visibility 50 centimeters. Static hissed back, faint. Copy that. Surface team standing by. I kicked eastward, following the contour of pilings. My lamp beam wavered over an abandoned fishing net draped like a shroud across a pile of barnacled beams. The net's mesh was tangled with plastic lures and the stub of a broken rod. I reached out, fingers brushing its damp threads, then recoiled as the net shifted. A frayed lifeline, looped and tied to a piling, throbbed in the current, as though something invisible tugged at it. My breathing tightened. I finned closer, chest pressing with pressure, and traced the lifeline to its anchor point. A diver's belt, cut loose, belt knife missing. That couldn't have been left by a casual fisherman. I tapped my gauge, depth 15 feet, and angled my body beneath the net, careful not to snag my gear. My beam caught a pale curve of fiberglass below, the rim of a submerged kayak, half buried in silt. I drifted down to inspect. A helmet, cracked and algae-coated, lay beside the cockpit. I flicked on my backup light, its red glow carved through the water like a wound. Inside the cockpit, waterlogged gear floated free. A GoPro camera with its lens shattered, a wet notebook whose pages clung together in slimy clumps. My gloved fingertips nudged the notebook, words blurred, but I saw the date, May 17th, and a hastily sketched sonar diagram. My pulse spiked. That sketch wasn't recreational. It looked like dive team notes. Did this belong to one of us? I clipped the camera into my harness and floated upward, heart hammering. As I rose, something snagged my leg, a slippery tendril of kelp or snagged rope, and yanked me, sideways. I spilled silt into the beam, vision reduced to a milky white. Panic trembled at the edges of my mind. I kicked hard, clearing the cloud, and found myself face to face with a driftwood mannequin torso, its head missing, its wooden arms spread wide, as if embracing me in a silent warning. Leader? Status? Ortiz's voice crackled. I swallowed. Got an obstacle, a wooden torso pinned under a piling at 200 degrees. Static. Then, understood. Avoid entanglement. Continue search. I forced calm. Kicked past the debris, my lamp piercing the gloom until it found open water again. The underside of the pier stretched out like a vaulted cathedral, every beam a rib supporting a dark roof. I exhaled, bubbles streaming in arcs behind me. Ahead, deeper in the grid, I saw a flicker of motion, something drifting against the crossbeams. I angled toward it. The current tugged at my suit, urging me onward. My beam caught on fabric. A diver's exposure suit, bloated and waving like an underwater flag. The arms of the suit dangled, wrists bound in tubing that led to nothing. I flicked off my strobe, no need to startle anything, and edged closer. My mask touched the suction of water closing around every inch of me. I fought a sudden wave of claustrophobia, chest tightening as I drifted under the ruinous planks. Then I saw the faceplate of a dive mask, cracked and blank, staring back. Bell, I've located a body, victim at 002 degrees, depth 20 feet. The words came out in a rasp, my voice foreign in my own ear. I crossed to the suit, checking for movement. None. I slapped my glove against the torso. No response. I exhaled, bubbles dancing in the light as I hooked the victim's buoyancy vest to my cargo line. As I prepared to ascend with the bag, my sonar beacon beeped, a frantic, stuttering alarm. I tapped the housing. The beeps stuttered faster, then cut out. Silence. My heart lurched. No beacon meant no fix on my position. The darkness around me felt alive. I kicked toward the surface, each fin stroke breaking up silt into an opaque fog. The pier's beams slid past in strobing patterns. At 8 feet, the water cleared. I punched upward, breaking through the surface with a rasping gasp. Above, the pier lights bobbed. Ortiz's boat was circling, a searchlight slicing the dark. I coughed out water, mask fogged, and watched the bay settle back into pregnant silence. I pulled the lined body aboard, and as I swiped the silt from my suit, I glanced back at the ruined pier. Beneath its planks, something had removed my beacon signal, as if it didn't want me to know where I was. I stood, breath hollow. My chest heaved to the rhythm of that missing ping. I leveled off at 8 feet and kicked away from the pier, silt billowing in slow spirals behind me. The water was heavy with stagnation. An oily sheen on the surface hinted at fuel residue, and the brackish taste clung to my tongue. I toggled my mask lamp higher, the beam slicing through the gloom to reveal the underside of the dock. Every joist and crossbeam a gnarled finger pointing into darkness. My tender's boat hovered above, searchlight dancing across the waves, but down here I was alone. Leader, Ortiz crackled in my ear. Your beacon's still offline. You copy? Static swallowed his words. I jabbed the transmitter. Nothing. The buoyant weight belt at my waist felt suddenly heavier, as though gravity had turned traitor. I checked my depth, 22 feet, then shifted into a fin-first descent toward the deeper zone I'd scoped on my previous grid. My pulse throbbed at 30 beats per minute. I forced a deliberate kick pattern, calming the rush in my veins. Below me, the seabed sloped again, though here jagged pilings had collapsed into the bay, forming a subaquatic maze. Rusted cables unknotting from tearing tarps, concrete chunks tangled with seaweed. They created pockets of refuge for marine life and traps for the unwary diver. I skirted the outer edge, flashlight beams skimming shimmering schools of minnows that fled like startled phantoms. My regulator hissed, a lifeline in the silence. I followed the derelict trawler's starboard hull, its metal warped by age and pressure. A rusted hatch gaped open, half submerged, leading into a belly that must have once housed engines. Curiosity surged, but procedure warned. Lost beacons sometimes meant heat sources below, or worse, entanglements. I hesitated, catching my breath, but duty drove me onward. I reoriented my body and slipped inside. The hull's interior was a suffocating corridor, just wide enough for my shoulders, walls pocked with barnacles and encrusted wires. I could feel the metal biting through my gloves as I finned forward, silt rising in curtains that cut visibility to mere inches. My lamp illuminated control panels, glowing LEDs long since powered down, labels in peeling stencils. Engine room, bilge pump, auxiliary power. I exhaled, bubbles ricocheting off the ceiling. The smell of diesel still lingered in the metal, decades-old fuel trapped in hoses and filters. I edged deeper, sonar beacon tucked beneath my harness. Panic pricked my skin when I remembered it was supposed to guide my way out. Without it, I was flying blind. My compass sat heavy against my chest, but I dared not look down. What if it had spun free? Instead, I pressed my palm to the hull's cold steel and counted strokes, 1, 2, 3, guiding my path back if all else failed. Ahead, a glow flickered, faint, phosphorescent, almost organic. I angled my light toward it and froze. A cluster of tubes had ruptured, releasing an iridescent plume of bioluminescent bacteria. They drifted in slow motion, waxing and waning like dying embers. I watched, entranced and unnerved, nature's warning beacon in the darkest place. My lamp's red strobe sliced through the bloom, turning the water into a ghostly cathedral of light. I blinked, heart pounding, as shapes materialized beyond the bloom. Skeletal ribs of a long-buried barge, broken at the keel. I toggled my regulator and exhaled, bubbles vibrating against the hull. I knew where I was now. The barge sat at the trench's eastern lip, where currents converged like rivers underground. That convergence had likely snuffed my beacon signal. If I could find the bow's breakpoint, I could claw my way out of this labyrinth. I finned toward a gaping hole in the wreck's side, lifting my knees into an inverted crouch to pass through. The passage narrowed instantly. My shoulders scraped corroded rivets, and silt erupted in a blinding wave. Coughing in my mask, I reversed course, but the beam had vanished. Total darkness closed in. My lamp had been jarred off its mount, breath jackknifed in my lungs. Panicked bubbles burst against the metal ceiling. I fumbled at my harness, backup light clipped and ready, and hit the switch. A dim glow flickered in my hand, barely enough to trace my boots on the floor plating. I pressed forward, guide hand sliding along riveted edges, every groove a lifeline. The corridor angled upward, constricting into an air pocket chamber. Only I wasn't sure the cargo hold had ever been dry. Water sloshed at my waist as I emerged into a low-ceiling cubicle. Old crates lay scattered, their stenciled labels half erased. Rust flakes drifted like snow. I swept my light overhead and saw a narrow ladder leading to a hatch, the barge's emergency escape. My gloved fingers locked onto the ladder rungs, icy metal biting through neoprene. I ascended, every movement kicking up sediment that hung like a pall. At the top, the hatch felt heavy under one hand, reluctant to open. I pushed with my shoulder, braced my boots, and felt it give way with a protesting squeal. Water sluiced in, and I wrenched upward, breaking through into a small compartment carved into the pier's support. Air bubbles raced toward cracks in the wooden floor above. I reached up and punched through a warped plank, water rushing out in a spray. My head broke the surface. I inhaled lungfuls of night air, heart thundering deafeningly. Above me, a shaft of starlight pierced the pier deck, illuminating a single beam of dust in the air. I grabbed the hatch edge and hoisted myself onto a narrow catwalk, chest heaving. Behind me, the hatch slammed shut with a thud that reverberated through the structure. I strained to catch my breath, but the world tilted as a subterranean roar, like a water hammer, shook the timbers beneath my feet. The pier groaned, planks creaked. I dared a glance back through the hatch viewport. The water below churned, frothing in an upward spiral, as though something massive had moved beneath. My tender's searchlight swept the bay, but here, under the pier, darkness reigned. A current tugged at the cargo net slung over my shoulder, cargo I'd forgotten, the mannequin torso and the diver's gear from earlier. I looked down and saw something shift in the beam. The wooden limbs, once inert, now drifted sideways as if reaching. My breath caught. I stepped back. Then, in a single bone-chilling moment, the hatch slit closed from below, sealing me inside the cold wooden box. The roar stilled. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I pressed my palm to the hatch's wooden frame, listening to the hollow thump as the latch sealed behind me, then reached for my torch, only to find the switch stiff, unresponsive. Darkness slammed into my goggles like a physical blow. My lungs clenched. I pointed my fingers toward the floorboard gap, where a sliver of dim light trickled in from above. That sliver was my only guide out of this trapped cubicle. I slid along the plank wall on my knees, fingertips tracing the seam where two boards met. My wet boots scraped against aged nails, and the smell of rot rose to meet me in the stale air. Behind me, the hatch's exterior wood warped slightly, groaning under unseen pressure. Each breath felt borrowed, as though I were siphoning time as well as air. I found the seam where the floor met the compartment wall and pushed upward, shoving a board loose with gloved hands. Splinters pricked my fingertips, and a rush of damp air whispered through the gap. Relief surged, but only briefly. Beyond that broken board was a shaft no wider than my forearm, leading into an unseen cavity beneath the pier supports. It was narrow, claustrophobic. I'd have to squeeze through on my side, tank first, then shimmy the rest of my body down. I jammed my mask lamp's beam through the opening. The light wavered against wet pilings and mud-caked beams until it found a small ledge 3 feet below. That ledge was my first footprint out of the wooden box. I exhaled, chest tight, and kinked my knees into my chest. One quick glance at my depth gauge showed a drop of 5 feet. No immediate danger, but every foot closer to open water meant the air in my tank drained faster. I bit my lip, set my jaw, and slid my head and shoulders into the crawl space. The tank's bulk snagged immediately. I arched my back, teeth gritting, and pushed until I heard a metal clip shear against barnacle-encrusted rebar. A shower of barnacle shards fell into the darkness below. Heat, my own panic, flattened my lungs. I rotated my body, twisting until the tank cleared. I felt the jagged edge of the broken board slice through my wrist sleeve. I cursed and yanked free, ignoring the sting. Now, waist deep in the shaft, I planted my boots on the muddy wall, each foot searching for perches. My glove slid over slick wood, but then I felt a notch, an old bolt hole chewed by rust. I jammed a toe in and levered upward, half dragging, half swimming deeper into the cavern. The beam caught on something glinting. Metal straps looped around a piling, holding what looked like a small sealed container. Its surface was etched with numbers and letters. R13 Echo. I pressed forward, curious, but my progress triggered a cascade of silt. It roiled in waves, filling my vision in seconds until I could barely discern my own hands. Instinct screamed, "Back out, now!" I thrust my arms against the silt's tide, kicked around my tank's bulk, and fought my way upward, breath coming in ragged bursts. At the edge of the broken board, I yanked myself free and collapsed against the hatch frame, helmet skidding on the wood as I crawled out into the compartment. My chest heaved. I blinked. The sliver of light that had guided me was gone. The hatch overhead remained sinisterly sealed. My gauge read 45 feet. Depth had increased without my realizing it. A cold realization sank in. The cavity must slope downward toward a deeper void beneath the pier. I had no beacon, no light, and now no direct way back above. I forced my breathing to slow, inhale steady, exhale measured. The sealed box offered no other egress. I scanned my harness. My knife was clipped to my thigh, its serrated edge untouched. Only one option remained: cut my way to freedom. I drew the knife, fingertips trembling on the grip, and pressed its serrated edge against the hatch's inner rim. Every pull of the blade scraped against soaked wood, dulling its teeth. My arms burned, slick with sweat and cold water. Behind me, the compartment's walls seemed to press inward. The faint drone of water seeping through cracks sounded like whispered taunts. Split seconds later, the blade caught, an audible tear, as the hatch's board began to splinter. A shower of wood fragments drifted down, mingling with droplets from above. My heart thundered. I was carving my escape in the bowels of a haunted pier. Then, halfway through the final cut, the hatch shuddered. A sudden rush of current slammed against my back, knocking me forward. The compartment quaked, and a low groan vibrated through the beams. My blade clattered to the floor as I stumbled, mask light flaring wildly. In that moment of disorientation, the world tilted. Water spewed through the slashed board, a pressurized jet that filled the box within seconds. I sucked in a breath through my regulator, thank God it still functioned, and the cold torrent battered my suit as the hatch rattled against its frame. My knife lay just out of reach on the slick floor. I snapped my head around and lunged for it, slick wood throwing me off balance. My fins kicked blindly, dislodging loose debris. The water soared to my chest, then my neck. Panic threatened to choke me, but I forced a slow, steady breath. A final kick, forehead brushing the hatch's lip, and I snagged the knife. I yanked it free and pressed the blade against the hatch once more. The rattle intensified. The pier above seemed to creak in protest. One more saw through the wet grain, then a crack. Light exploded in my vision as the board split away, and I gasped in relief, pushing upward through the cascade of water. My head broke free into a small chamber lit by a single, flickering lamp. One of the pier's old maintenance lights. It cast jagged shadows across a narrow walkway, soaked planks, stretching into darkness both ahead and behind. I hauled myself out, knees skidding on algae-slick wood, and collapsed against a support beam. The roar of rushing water echoed behind me as the hatch sealed with a thunderous finality. I sat, chest heaving, mask dripping, and wiped water from my goggles. Above the walkway, an old sign read, "Service Corridor, Authorized Personnel Only." Below that, a peeling sticker bore the same code as the container I'd seen, R13 Echo. My pulse thundered as I realized I'd surfaced not into freedom, but into another hidden passage beneath the pier, one designed for clandestine access. I looked back at the water sluicing through the hatch, then along the corridor. Somewhere in this shadowed underbelly lay that metal container, and an exit I still had to find. I slid forward into the corridor, boots slapping wet wood with each step as the darkness swallowed me whole. My mask lamp lay dead in my hand, a hollow weight, and the single maintenance light overhead, flickering like a faulty brainstem, cast wavering shadows that danced on the ceiling beams. Salt spray still clung to my suit. The echo of rushing water pulsed behind the hatch I'd burst through. Ahead, the corridor stretched into an abyss of black, the air thick with the smell of mildew and rust. I drew in a measured breath, testing my regulator. A steady hiss answered. Thank God, my primary was intact. I clipped my backup light to my shoulder strap and toggled it on. A narrow cone of pale white cut through the gloom, revealing the corridor's true scale. 5 feet wide, 8 feet tall, constructed of reinforced steel plates overlain with wooden planks. The floor sagged in places, water pooling in shallow troughs that reflected the lamp beam like broken mirrors. Rail tracks embedded in the wood ran along the center. Ancient cart tracks, I guessed, for moving heavy cargo beneath the pier. My fingertips traced one of the steel plates. It was cold, slick with condensation. I looked down at the stenciled warning. No smoking. Hazardous materials. Beneath it, a stencil code matched the container's label. R13 Echo. I swallowed. I'd come here to find that container, but the corridor offered no sign of where it might be stored, only endless repetition of beams and rivets. I stepped forward, the cart tracks guiding me like rails in a tunnel. My boots slapped wet wood. Every footfall felt magnified in the silence. I passed twisted cables and rusted pipes that dropped into the darkness below, their ends jagged and open, as if someone had ripped out valves in a hurry. A low hum vibrated through the steel under my glove, a subtle resonance like electricity coursing behind the walls. Something in the air prickled my skin, static, or maybe fear. I flexed my fingers around my knife's hilt, its serrated edge still gritty with wood splinters. My tactile gauge told me I had roughly half a tank left. Surface air felt distant, hypothetical. I forced my breathing steady, inhale 2 seconds, exhale 3. My heart thudded in my ears, but I held the beat. Up ahead, the corridor bent left. I rounded the corner and froze. A steel hatch blocked the way. A circular porthole door, like those on old ships. It sat half open, its rim scraped and corroded, swinging on rusty hinges. Beyond the hatch lay a chamber lit by a pair of industrial fluorescents, their bulbs buzzing and sputtering. I inhaled sharply. Light meant power. Power meant access to machinery or storage. I slid through the hatchway, water lapping at my waist as I emerged into a low-ceilinged storage room. The air here was warmer, heavy with the scent of oil and solvents. My lamp revealed stacks of metal crates, some sealed with numerical locks, others gaping open to reveal glass vials floating in brine, their labels waterlogged but legible. Specimen A2, sample R13 Echo. My pulse spiked. I waded through shallow puddles to one crate stacked nearest the door, its lid cracked open by twisted hinges. Inside, a metal cylinder lay surrounded by foam blocks. The cylinder was about 2 feet long and 6 inches in diameter, painted matte black with a red stripe and the etched code R13 Echo. Its surface bore scratches, as if it had been dragged across a steel grating. I knelt in the water, bracing myself on one hand as I reached in and felt its cold, unyielding shell. I lifted it free, hoisting it against my chest as water sluiced off its ends. At that moment, the fluorescence screamed and flickered off. Darkness pressed in again, more complete than before. My backup light's beam danced across foam remnants. The cylinder's red stripe glowed faintly in the gloom. A heavy mechanical clank sounded behind me, like a lock sliding into place. The hatch I'd entered through swung shut with a metallic thunk. My breath hitched, bubbles rippling in my mask. I turned, knife drawn, pointing into the blackness where the hatch once hung open. The cart tracks led straight to the opposite wall, no other exit in sight. Panic burned hot in my veins, but I forced calm. Grip the cylinder, secure the knife, and find another way out. I tapped the cylinder's end cap. It was sealed tight, no obvious latch or panel. The cart tracks suggested this room had once hosted heavy cargo movement. Perhaps a cart still lay somewhere to the left. I swept my light over the floor and saw a chain attached to a pulley overhead. The chain's link hung within arm's reach, coated in rust and grit. I grabbed it, feeling the metal's texture, and yanked downward. The pulley groaned, and with a sudden lift, a trapdoor in the ceiling cracked open, revealing a ladder above. Relief surged. I shimmied beneath the trapdoor, hoisting myself up until the ladder rung bit into my palm. My gloves slipped against the damp metal, and my knees buckled on the wood until I balanced, tank pressed against the hatch's frame. The ladder extended into a shaft of blackness. I pressed my shoulder to the hatch's edge and poked my head up. Above, footprints on dusty planks led to a grated catwalk suspended beneath the pier deck, lit by intermittent emergency lights that sputtered in half-life. I exhaled, heart stuttering. The grate above sang under my weight as I climbed through the hatch into the catwalk. My lamp revealed rotting beams overhead and the bay's surface slapping against the hull above. The cylinder felt like a ticking bomb in my arms. Whatever it contained, it was dangerous. I stood on the catwalk, dripping wet, and shone my light along the planks. A handrail ran the length of it, but one section appeared torn away, the beams charred as if scorched by flame. I stepped carefully around the blackened wood, each footfall echoing in the cavernous space. Beyond, I saw a vertical shaft, an open grate leading up to the pier deck. Light filtered down in dim rectangles. That was my path out. I set the cylinder on the grating, resisting the urge to drop it. Its code, R13 Echo, reverberated in my mind like a warning. I unhooked my knife and clipped it to my D-ring, ready to clear any obstruction. Then I placed both hands on the grate's edge and heaved upward. The grate resisted, caught on warped supports, but with a grunt I levered it free. Metal twisted, and the grate gave way, dropping into darkness with a thunderous crash. I climbed through, chest tight, and surfaced onto the creaking pier deck. Night air washed over me, smelling of diesel exhaust and brine. The moon, obscured by clouds, broke through for a moment, illuminating the cylinder in my arms. Behind me, the hatch below sealed itself with a distant clank. I dared one glance over my shoulder, only the gridded supports and murmuring water. I set the cylinder down and checked my gauge. 30 feet of air remained. Enough to reach the surface ladder at the pier's edge, then to the boat. But as I turned toward my exit, the wooden deck heaved underfoot, and a sharp crack split the night. A fracture in a support beam under my boot. The pier groaned, as though protesting my presence, and the cylinder rolled, teetering at the threshold of a rotted plank. I lunged and caught it, fingers slipping across the painted metal. A hidden nail tore through my glove, biting into skin. I hissed. Pain lanced up my arm. Above the plank, I saw a void where wood had collapsed. If I'd taken another step, I would have fallen straight into the black water 20 feet below. My heart pounded as fog gathered on the horizon. I sprinted toward the ladder at the pier's edge, the cylinder tucked under one arm. Each step threatened to splinter rotten planks, each breath a ragged gulp of salt air. Then, behind me, a sudden creak, and the entire pier shook as if something massive had shifted beneath the supports. My boots skidded. I stumbled toward the ladder, cylinder sliding free. I lunged, catching it just as the deck beneath me buckled. Wood groaned and cracks snaked outward in a spiderweb pattern. The cylinder's warning code echoed, R13 Echo. I climbed the ladder 2 rungs at a time, heart in my throat. Behind me, the deck snapped in half, a jagged fissure widening like a mouth ready to swallow me. I reached the boat's rail, muscles trembling, and hauled myself aboard with the cylinder clutched tight. As I dropped to my knees on the deck, I heard the final crack, the pier's fractured beam giving way, and a thunder of collapsing timbers echoed across the bay. Plumes of spray erupted where supports had once stood. I looked back at the empty space where the pier had been, then down at the cylinder in my hands. It was my only clue to what lay beneath, and now it threatened to drag the bay into its secrets. I exhaled, chest heaving, and stared at the code etched on its side. Then, as I prepared to signal the surface team, my compass swung violently, spinning clockwise like a magnet gone mad, before settling into a dead end, north pointing south. I didn't wait for the deck lights to stabilize. I kicked off the boat's rail and plunged once more into the bay's black mirror, cylinder clutched against my side. The water swallowed me whole, a velvet curtain closing behind me, and I angled downward toward the fractured pier supports, mind racing with the implications of what I carried. My mask lamp's beam swept across scattered rubbled pilings, then found the jagged stump of the support that had collapsed. Beneath it, a yawning gap opened like a wound in the bay floor. That was where I'd slipped through the grate earlier, where currents converged and swallowed my compass's signal. "Bell, I'm returning below," I whispered into the mic woven into my suit. The radio crackled once, then fell silent. My beacon must still be offline. I kicked toward the opening, air rising in a cascade of bubbles, each one trailing a white tail of displacement. At 20 feet, the current tugged at me, urging me off course. I planted my boots on a chunk of concrete, the cylinder's weight pressing into my side like a tether to reality. My depth gauge flickered. 30 feet. I edged forward, torch beam wobbling along the broken beams. The jagged wood and twisted rebar formed a labyrinth, and somewhere in that shadowed chaos lay an access point to the cargo tracks I'd traced in the catwalk. My lungs tightened. I forced a careful inhale. Breathe in 2, out 3. The hiss of my regulator was my only companion. I scanned left. Nothing but silt-choked debris. Then right, a half-buried ladder rung, encrusted with barnacles and algae. I reached out, fingertips brushing something cold and metallic. A fragment of coating plate, etched R13 in relief, still attached to a corroded pipe. My pulse hammered. I gripped the cylinder tighter and pulled myself along the broken ladder, ascending into a hidden trench carved under the pier's substructure. The beam cut through the darkness ahead, revealing the top of a grated hatch, one I recognized from my earlier journey. It led to the storage chamber. I wedged my shoulder against the hatch frame and heaved it open with a grunt, water rushing in to greet me. My torch's red glow lit the chamber's foam-lined floor, crates bobbing gently in the chill. I set the cylinder down against the nearest wall and knelt, heart thudding, as I wiped silt from its painted stripe. "Leader, status." Ortiz's voice crackled. "Beacon's dead. I'm at the storage hatch, section R13. Echo is in hand." silence answered, heavy enough to choke on. I pressed my palm to the cylinder's surface and flipped a small latch I hadn't noticed before. It popped open to reveal an inner ring of velvet-lined grooves holding a smooth glass vial. The vial was faintly phosphorescent, an inner glow that pulsed once, then twice, like a heartbeat. My breath hitched. The code Echo suddenly made sense. This was no simple specimen canister. It was designed to signal, to broadcast, an underwater sonar beacon of sorts. My mind raced. The missing divers, the disappearances along Highway 41. Were those thin spots echoed here beneath the waves? If this vessel carried a device capable of warping signals, of bending currents and swallowing beacons, then what I held was far more dangerous than I'd imagined. I clipped the open latch shut, sealing the vial inside its armor, and hoisted the cylinder. The moment I stood, the chamber lights flickered, and then died. Total darkness swallowed me again, the only illumination the faint bioluminescent swirl still seeping from the cylinder's seams. I struck my backup light, click, but it sputtered and died too. Panic seized me. The water felt alive, pressing in from all sides. I fumbled for my knife, centered my grip on the cylinder, and braced against the hatch frame. Then the hatch slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled my teeth. The chamber reverberated as a low mechanical hum began, somewhere deeper, under the floor plates. The hum built in pitch until it became a keening wail, a song of metal twisting and currents churning. I pounded on the hatch, bubbles pouring from my mouthpiece in frantic arcs. Knife in hand, I slashed at the wood planks, sending splinters drifting like drowned ghosts. The hissing current outside the hatch surged, then receded, then surged again, a rhythmic pulse that matched the cylinder's faint glow. "Bell, Ortiz, I'm sealed in. I need extraction." I yelled into the mic, but only silence answered. My radio sputtered, static, then a single voice, my own, distorted and distant. "Leader, can you hear? Us?" My heart stopped. That's not Ortiz. That's not possible. I stormed the hatch with the knife, wood giving way under the blade's teeth until a sliver of moonlight broke through. I wedged myself between twisted boards and spat into the void. "Orient yourselves." Hearing my own voice underwater means. The words died on my lips as the cylinder's glow flared and dimmed, like an inhale and exhale. Then a single ping echoed through my suit, clear, familiar, a sonar blip returning an impossible echo. My blood ran cold. It was my own sonar, bouncing back with a delay of minutes, not seconds. That meant the water around me was elongated, stretched, time itself warped. I pressed my cheek to the hatch gap and flicked my light switch, still dead. Above my head, the mechanical hum became a low thrum, as though machinery, ancient and vast, had awakened beneath the pier. A distant current clawed at my legs, dragging me backward. I yanked free, stumbled, and the cylinder slipped from my grasp. It sank slowly, its glow pulsing faintly as it descended into the chamber's heart. I lunged for it, but the latch popped open, and the glass vial broke free, drifting downward. A bubbly mist seeped from the vial's mouth, spreading in shimmering tendrils. I lunged again. The mist curled around my hand, cold, electric. My regulator balked, sputtered. I choked on a mouthful of mist-tainted water. The world spun as the mist coalesced into a shimmering form, an outline of a diver's body, translucent and wavering. My own reflection, but hollow, an echo of me moving in slow motion. My heart thundered against my ribs, every instinct screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The echo drifted toward me, eyes blinking in silent desperation. Then it spoke, not in words, but in a pulse of vibration against my skull, an echo in time. You shouldn't have come back. My breath caught. The echo hovered where the cylinder had rested, tendrils of mist weaving through its code, R13. Echo. The hatch splintered open from the inside, and a surge of water and mist slammed over me, pulling me backward into the chamber's depths. The echo's eyes focused on the broken vial, drifting toward the grate that led deeper still. I stalled, knife point trembling, lunging to intercept, but my strength failed. The mist surged, and the echo dissolved into the water, leaving only the sonar ping, slow, distorted, receding into darkness, just beyond reach. My suit's mic crackled once more with my own voice. Leader here. Can anyone? Nothing but that final ping, fading into the void. I kicked off from the wreckage's edge, the bay's cold fingers tugging at my suit as I plunged back into the depths. The cylinder I carried throbbed against my ribs, its phosphorescent glow pulsing in time with the distant sonar click that still echoed in my skull. I angled downward through the open grate I'd splintered, currents rushing past like wrathful spirits eager to drag me into their domain. Below, the storage chamber lay silent except for the cylinder's faint shimmer. I landed on the soft foam floor, water swirling at my waist, and let my lamp settle. The crate stacks loomed like tombstones. The rotated shelves revealed only empty cavities where other specimens had once rested. I scanned the walls for the ladder back to the catwalk, but it had vanished, replaced by the solid bulk of steel plating that wasn't there before. My blood turned to ice. The corridor beyond the hatch now ended in a sealed bulkhead, etched with the words, "No trespassing." I exhaled, bubbles dribbling past my mask. My gauge read 28 feet, barely enough to search for an alternative exit before I'd need to surface. I pressed my hand against the bulkhead's cold steel and traced the weld lines to a circular hatch wheel, corroded but turning with effort. I gripped the spokes and pried with every ounce of strength, water rushing past the slight crack as the seal began to give. The wheel groaned, unlocking, and I swung the hatch inward, spilling a jet of oily sludge that mingled with the brine. Inside was a subchamber so narrow I had to press my back against one wall and my knees against the other to move forward. My cylinder's glow revealed racks of numbered lockers, each one labeled with dates spanning decades. I recognized some designations: Echo, Foxtrot, Gamma. Others were unfamiliar, random letters and numbers, as if this place archived experiments long since buried. A thin film of sediment covered the floor, and a single set of footprints, too large for my boots, led toward a grate at the far end. I followed the prints, boots sliding in the loose silt. The grate's bars were thick and rusted through in spots, but the middle panel had been cut away entirely, wires fraying at the edge. Beyond, a stone-walled shaft plunged into inky nothingness. No ladder, no platform, just a yawning chasm where lost things fell forever. My regulator ticked. I checked the cylinder's latch. It was secure. I'd come this far. I couldn't turn back. I pried one frayed wire loose, and sparks scattered through the water like lightning bugs. The current shifted, tugging me forward as if the shaft itself beckoned. I swallowed against the pressure in my chest and finned into the void. Water closed in, my lamp's beam fractured into shards of light that danced off unseen walls. The drop was immediate. 20 feet, then 50, then 70, until the gauge quivered at 90 feet. I finned faster, heart in my throat. Something thumped against the shaft wall, a slow, deliberate rap that matched the instant dull vibration of my cylinder's glow. I reached out, fingers brushing a rough surface. Rock, hewn, smooth as glass. The shaft walls were carved with strange glyphs that writhed in the beam, symbols I couldn't decipher but that made my skin crawl. At one point, a symbol resembled my own diver's emblem, a pair of crossed regulators, etched deep and dripping with rust-colored water. Then the current abated. The shaft opened into a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in darkness. My lamp lit only a fraction of its breadth. Hundreds of cruciform supports, rusted chains hanging like pendulums, and in the center a circular dais where the water lay unnaturally still. On the dais floated a third cylinder, identical to mine, but cracked, its contents leaking a pale mist that drifted upward in tendrils. A cold dread convulsed my gut. I realized with a start that my own cylinder's glow had nearly gone out. This place drew power from the specimens it held. If I lost light completely, I would be swallowed whole by the blackness. I clipped mine to the dais's rim and kicked back, arms aching to regain distance. The cracked cylinder's mist coalesced into shapes, mirrored echoes of me and the echo figure I'd glimpsed before. They knelt on the dais, their hands pressed against its surface as if trapped behind glass. Their helmets were cracked, regulators silent, eyes empty. A low hum rose from the cavern's depths. Sonar pings multiplied into a cacophony, each echo overlapping the last in a maddening chorus. The echo divers on the dais turned, and though their faces were featureless, I felt their gaze pin me to the spot. The water's silence warped into whispers. "Join us! Join us!" Instinct ripped through me. I reeled backward, fins skimming the dais's rim, and the cylinder's mists reached outward, thin fingers that curled around my ankles. Panic clawed at my chest as I tugged free, water churning. My lamp flickered violently, once, twice, and then died, plunging me into absolute darkness. My beacon yelped, a single, prolonged ping that began distant and reverberated louder as it multiplied, filling the cavern with a deafening chorus of echoes. I fumbled for my knife, heart hammering, only to find it missing, torn from its clip, drifting away in the black. I heard the grate above me slam shut, metal rattling against metal in a final, sealing clang. The echoes on the dais rose in volume, as if celebrating a feast. I kicked upward, lungs burning, desperate for the pull toward open water. But the current reversed, a downward surge that dragged me deeper into the waiting arms of that endless cavern. With one last ragged breath, I kicked against the void, only to vanish into the depths where every sound returned a distorted echo, and time itself unraveled like an old spool. In the crushing silence, the last ping faded, and was never heard again.